The committee will come to order. I'd certainly like to thank each of our witnesses for joining us here today. Thank you for your dedicated service to the American people and for the work to address humanitarian and security challenges at our southern border over the last 2 years. Over the next few months, we know that these challenges will persist, especially as the administration moves forward with its plans to end Title 42. While ongoing litigation and shifting COVID-19 circumstances may impact the exact timing of when the public health order is lifted, the administration must have a detailed, well-thought-out, and well-resourced plan to secure our borders and address expected changes in migration once this policy change goes into effect. Yesterday, this committee had an opportunity to hear directly from Secretary Mayorkas on this and other critical issues. Today, we will have another opportunity to hear from senior administration officials and go into further detail about how the federal government will secure our borders and manage the proposed termination of this policy. Title 42 is a temporary public health order, and it is not a long-term solution to our border security needs. Today's hearing is an important opportunity for the administration to detail both their short-term plans for addressing this expected policy change, as well as the long-term solutions that Congress and the administration must work together to ensure that we have secure borders. In fact, Title 42 was initiated to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in March of 2020. It has severely restricted the use of proven enforcement mechanisms that prevent illegal border crossings, and in turn has contributed to an increase in repeat illegal crossings. Soon after this policy was implemented, the number of single adults trying to illegally cross the southern border doubled. And now repeated attempts by individuals to unlawfully enter the United States has reached a nearly 15-year high, and that certainly is unsustainable and places significant burdens on the border security professionals. I look forward to discussing the administration's plans to reinstate proven border security enforcement methods, such as escalating consequences for repeat offenders that have been shown significantly to reduce illegal crossings between ports of entry and ensure Border Patrol agents can stay focused on their border security mission. Reinstating these kinds of consequences will hold individuals who break the law accountable, while ensuring that children, families, and other migrants fleeing persecution are able to present themselves at ports of entry for a timely review of their asylum claims. In addition to addressing the humanitarian situation at the southern border, the administration must ensure they have the personnel and resources needed to ensure safe, secure, and efficient facilitation of lawful trade and travel at our ports of entry, and combat the flow of deadly illicit drugs like fentanyl that continue to wreak havoc on our communities in Michigan as well as all across the nation. I have long pressed for robust resources to ensure we have enough personnel as well as technology like non-intrusive screening equipment that improves Customs and Border Protection officers' ability to examine vehicles and large amounts of cargo efficiently and stop illegal drugs from being smuggled across our borders. I look forward to discussing what more the administration needs to ensure that we can prevent fentanyl and other illegal substances from harming our communities. And finally, this hearing is an opportunity to discuss the policies that Congress and the administration must work together on to address the long-term challenges at our borders, and especially the southern border. Over the past decade, we have seen a surge in the number of migrants arriving at the southern border nearly every year, and under both Republican and Democratic administrations. It's clear that without bipartisan action to pass comprehensive immigration reform and reforms to our asylum system, these challenges will persist for years and for decades to come. I look forward to hearing from today's panel about what long-term solutions the administration is proposing to address the root causes of migration, increased regional cooperation with our partners in South and Central America, and ensure migrants receive humane treatment while streamlining the asylum process. Challenges at our southern border are not new, but they are significant. And today's discussion will provide this committee with the opportunity to ensure our nation has sufficient tools, sufficient resources, and personnel to take these issues head on. Ranking Member Portman, you are recognized for your opening comments.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this hearing on the southwest border, which clearly is in a crisis situation now, and I think everybody agrees with that. It's hard not to when you look at the facts. We discussed this issue at length yesterday with Secretary Mayorkas, and today we're going to discuss it further with our witnesses, who I appreciate coming from Homeland Security, State, Health and Human Services. I appreciate your service to each of you, and thank you for, even though you're at a distance, I can see you, and we look forward to having you. I will say that I requested for the committee today to hear from the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, as well as the Chief of Border Patrol. We have not heard from these individuals in the 117th Congress, and I think that's wrong. I think we have an oversight responsibility. So with all due respect to our witnesses here, we like having you, but we hope that your bosses would have come, at least some of your bosses, to be able to ensure that we are getting the administration's view on what's happening on the border and how it's going to be fixed. Last year, about 1 million people came to the border unlawfully and were allowed into the United States. So let me repeat that. About 1 million people came to the border unlawfully and were admitted into the United States. As you know, we are talking a lot about whether these numbers are 10-year high, 15-year high, or whatever they are. This year, so far, 2022, it's unprecedented. So it's not a 15-year high, it's an historic high. We'll see what happens this summer, because typically we would expect more people to come. Also, because of Title 42 possibly ending, we are expecting a lot more people to come. And that's one of the big issues we talked about yesterday. I mentioned that about 1 million people come to the border unlawfully, are allowed into the United States. Most of those are asylees, are applicants for asylum. About 85% of them from Mexico or Central America. We don't have good numbers for the other countries, are eventually turned down for that asylum. But only a very small number, as we heard yesterday, are ever deported. So that's that part. But with regard to Title 42, another roughly 1 million people were turned away at the border under Title 42, meaning they were processed, about 40 hours of processing, and then they were sent back to their home country if they came from other than Mexico, or sent back to Mexico. And so that's 2 million, when you think about it, unlawfully coming to the border, 1 million coming in, being released, 1 million being turned away. If Title 42 no longer applies, math will tell you it looks like that number may double in terms of those admitted into the country, even though they came to the border without proper documentation. Some say it'll be more, because traffickers all over the world are already telling people when Title 42 is gone, just come on in, because it'll be relatively easy as long as you say you have credible fear. You can then come in under our asylum system. And so that's our challenge we've got. On top of that, of course, we allow in about 750,000 people a year under our legal immigration system, people who wait in line patiently, go through the right channels. I strongly support legal immigration. In fact, I believe we could actually increase legal immigration to be able to address our workforce challenges in this country and the need for us to have people who come to the United States legally with skills. But that makes us, in America, at least for our legal immigration system, probably the most generous country in the world, the 750,000 people who come in to the legal system. On top of that, we have people who evade the Border Patrol at the border. So we don't know how many that is. And we're going to talk today about the Border Patrol about this number. But what Rodney Scott says, who's the former chief of the Border Patrol, who I know is well known by many of us, is that he thinks that's about 400,000 people a year who evade the Border Patrol, evade being apprehended, and are added to the 1 million people who show up without papers and are allowed into the country, typically under asylum. On top of that, around 400,000 people a year. So we'll get some better numbers on that. But that just gives us some context of why there's such a deep concern when we're down there on the border. And I think every one of us have been there on this panel probably many times. And our staffs have been down there many times, including very recently, This is why the Border Patrol tells us that they believe that they will lose, as they say, operational control. We can talk what that means today of the border unless something is done. So this is a huge issue. On top of it, of course, we have an unprecedented amount of illegal drugs coming into the country, particularly this synthetic opioid called fentanyl, and it is streaming in. We'll talk about that today, why that's coming in. The Mexican transnational crime organizations are now specializing in this. It used to come from China, as you know, mostly through our U.S. mail system. Now it's mostly coming in through Mexico, being produced in Mexico, often with precursors from China, and often pressed into pills. And our citizens that we represent are dying of overdoses, partly because they don't know what these pills are. They may say Xanax, they may say Percocet, something else, but in fact they're fentanyl. This is leading to a record number, again, not a 15-year high, but a record number of overdose deaths in my home state of Ohio and around the country. So this is another border crisis that we have to address. We'll talk more about how we might do that. This, again, is a situation where policy makes a huge difference. President Obama deported or removed over 315,000 unlawful migrants in 2014 alone. In context, the Obama administration removed 65% of the migrants that entered unlawfully that year. In contrast, President Biden has deported or removed about 56,000, we heard yesterday, about 5%. So 65% versus 5%. And, of course, we have many more people who are in the queue right now. The backlog is about 1.6 million people for asylum, as an example. So, unfortunately, we have a situation where not only are we allowing more people in, but we're not having people leave once they're deemed not to be qualified to be asylees or otherwise are here illegally. And that's just a reality. And people know that, and the traffickers know that. And that's why they have such success in getting people to come to our border, charging them outrageous fees, often treating them very poorly, as we know. The administration's response to all this is to say we'll have a plan in case the surge gets worse. In fact, the plan states that the first pillar of border security is, quote, we have doubled our ability to transport non-citizens on a daily basis with flexibility to increase further, end quote. So much of the plan is about making it easier to get people into the interior, that's the response. The response is not to put deterrents in place to deter people coming illegally. Rather, it's to facilitate the flow, to make it easier, including processing people, as an example, on buses heading toward the interior of the country rather than doing it at the border because the facilities would be overwhelmed. So, again, I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, you're allowing me to speak a little bit today about this to just sort of set the context. I think it's important to understand what the numbers are, and I really look forward to the opportunity of speaking with all of you today and talking about solutions, not just what the crisis is. I think we all recognize that. I hope so. But what do we do going forward? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Portman. It is the practice of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if each of our witnesses would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Our first witness is January Contreras. Ms. Contreras currently serves as the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Health and Human Services, Administration of Children and Families, which is responsible for the care of unaccompanied minors. Assistant Secretary Contreras, a native of Arizona, previously served in the Department of Homeland Security as an ombudsman for Citizenship and Immigration Services, and most recently served as the CEO and Managing Attorney for Arizona Legal Women and Youth Services. Welcome, Ms. Contreras, to the committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Chair Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee, it is my privilege to appear on behalf of the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm January Contreras, the Assistant Secretary at the Administration for Children and Families, or ACF. At ACF, we are responsible for the care of unaccompanied children and for uniting them with family or a vetted sponsor. We carry out this duty through our Office of Refugee Resettlement, or ORR, which administers our Accompanied Children program. I was sworn in on March 31st And while I've only been on the job for 1 month, I am firmly committed to effectively managing the Unaccompanied Children's Program and prioritizing the safety of each child who comes into our care. During my first week on the job, I visited Fort Bliss. I wanted to see the children and our work up close. It was important to me to also meet with frontline staff. What I have witnessed in my role is the tireless work of the dedicated and skilled team at ORR and the many partners who have contributed to our mission. As I meet with you today, I believe we are prepared to continue safely serving all unaccompanied children referred to us. We currently have 8,390 children in our care, and we have an overall capacity of 15,500 across our network. ORR is able to promptly accept referrals and limit the amount of time children spend in CBP facilities to an average of 23 hours. Unaccompanied children have generally not been subject to Title 42 since November of 2020. However, we are planning and preparing for any potential increase in referrals that might result from the termination of Title 42 for adults and family units. We have developed contingency plans that allow us to build capacity as needed and deploy additional case management supports should referrals significantly increase. Today, we have cooperative agreements for 13,613 beds in our standard network for children. This is the highest number of standard beds in the history of the Unaccompanied Children Program. We have and continue to build greater capacity for more standard beds for kids, including adding to existing grants and funding new grants, authorizing hazard and incentive pay to retain and recruit staff, and working closely with CDC on COVID mitigation measures to keep children and staff safe. In addition to our standard beds, ORR has also utilized influx care facilities and emergency intake sites. Out of the 14 emergency intake sites that were utilized last year, only 2 remain active: Pecos EIS and the ORR EIS at Fort Bliss. Although emergency intake sites are temporary, they do allow us to quickly add beds for children when we need them. We also continuously work with our contractors to ensure that emergency intake sites are safe and appropriate placements for children, and that they provide key services, including robust case management and mental health supports. We are in the process of transitioning both of the remaining emergency intake sites to influx care facilities, which are required to provide the same services and supports as our standard shelters. And finally, we are conducting regular outreach to explore potential use of public and private properties that could be utilized as temporary influx care facilities as needed to accommodate increased referrals. As a child welfare agency, we know that the best place for children is with their family. Over the past year, ORR has implemented policy and process changes to expedite the safe placement of children with family and with vetted sponsors. Examples of this work are in my written testimony. ORR continues to focus on strengthening our work to carry out our duty to unaccompanied children and to ensure that ORR can adapt its capacity for their care. The Unaccompanied Children Contingency Fund included in the President's fiscal year 2023 budget would help address this by providing a reliable source of funding when referrals require ORR to add new capacity. While I am new to this role, fulfilling our legal and moral obligation to care for unaccompanied children will be my highest priority. I know that many of you have been key partners in supporting ORR's mission, and I look forward to working with all of you. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Contreras. Our next witness is Blas Nunez Neto. Mr. Nunez Neto serves as the Acting Assistant Secretary for Border and Immigration Policy at the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans. Mr. Nunez Neto, a former staffer on this committee, previously served as a senior advisor to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner and was the most recently a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation. Welcome to the committee. You may begin with your statement.
Thank you very much. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, distinguished members of the committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come back home to HISGAC to discuss these critical issues. Migratory surges along the southwest border have, unfortunately, become a regular occurrence over the past decade.
Excuse me, sir. Could you make sure your mic is on and maybe bring it a little closer?
Closer. Is this better?
It is.
All right. So migratory surges along our southwest border have unfortunately become a regular occurrence over the past decade under presidents of both parties. Over this period, we have seen as well fundamental changes to the nature, scope, and demographics of irregular migration, even as our encounters along the border have increased to unprecedented levels this year. There are currently more people displaced from their homes in the world than at any time since World War II. And in our hemisphere alone, there are significant diasporas of Venezuelans and Haitians and a growing number of Nicaraguans being displaced to neighboring countries as well. There's little doubt that a number of factors, including endemic violence, dictatorships, food insecurity, the COVID-19 pandemic, and dire economic conditions are pushing people to leave their countries. And this administration is committed to addressing the root causes of this migration. At the same time, though, we must acknowledge that our immigration system, and particularly our asylum system, are outdated and were not built to contend with the populations and volumes that we are now seeing at our border. For decades, the vast majority of individuals encountered at the southwest border were single adults from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Over the past 2 years, though, we have seen an unprecedented increase in migration from countries we have not traditionally encountered along our southwest border, which accounted for more than half of our unique encounters thus far this year when recidivism is factored in. In fact, roughly 25%, a full quarter of our encounters are from Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba this year, countries that we generally cannot return people to in large numbers due to the dictatorships that are in power. And over the past decade, as the committee knows, we have also seen a sharp increase in children and families encountered at the border, more vulnerable populations that require additional care. These changes dramatically affect our ability to efficiently and humanely apprehend, process, and remove migrants encountered at the border. Our system was simply not designed historically to handle these flows. Despite these challenges, DHS has taken concrete steps since last fall to prepare for the eventual lifting of the CDC's Title 42 order. These preparations will help us to address the challenges at our border more effectively while protecting the safety and security of our communities. The plan that was developed after many months of work has 6 principal pillars, which I address in depth in my written testimony. The first is surging resources to support our border operations, and this includes deploying more than 1,000 additional law enforcement personnel to the border, constructing additional soft-sided facility, and implementing robust public health protocols at the border, including our new vaccination program for migrants processed under Title VIII. The second pillar is increasing the processing efficiency within our border management and immigration systems. This includes really innovative work to create digital A-files and electronic notices to appear, which will realize substantial savings in time at the border, as well as en route processing and our enhanced central processing center model. The third pillar is our ongoing work to administer consequences for unlawful entry. We will and are committed to firmly but fairly enforcing our immigration laws, and this includes applying expedited removal to all non-citizens who are in fact removable. It includes focusing prosecutions on non-citizens whose conduct warrants it, including those who are seeking to evade capture at the border. And it includes our efforts to speed up the asylum system through executive action for those who are not detained through the asylum officer rule and through the dedicated docket. The fourth pillar is our ongoing work to bolster NGO capacity and support border communities by working closely with and providing support for NGOs and community stakeholders, efforts that Congress has supported with funding and for which we are deeply grateful. The fifth pillar involves our efforts to target and disrupt the transnational criminal organizations and the human smugglers who spread misinformation and put migrants in harm's way for profit. The sixth pillar involves our efforts to work regionally and collaborate with our partners in Mexico as well as throughout the hemisphere to enhance legal avenues for protection and opportunity throughout the hemisphere, but also to ensure that partner governments are in fact enforcing their borders and not just letting people pass through on their way north. As we prepare for the end of Title 42 on May 23rd, DHS is working night and day to address the irregular migration challenges at our southwest border. However, we recognize that executive action will never be an adequate stand-in for congressional action in this space, and we urge Congress to work with us on a bipartisan basis to enact legislation that can help this country modernize its immigration system, streamline asylum processing, better secure its borders, and provide hope to migrants in the region that they will have legal opportunities to come to the United States. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nunez-Neto. Our next witness is Marianne Kearney. Ms. Kearney is currently serving as the Senior Coordinating Official for the Department of Homeland Security's Southwest Border Coordination Center, leading efforts to establish operational plans and secure resources. Ms. Kearney comes from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, where she served as the Regional Administrator for FEMA Region 3 since 2010. Ms. Kearney, welcome to the committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My full written testimony has been submitted into the record. I would like to start by recognizing the thousands of men and women of the Department of Homeland Security who work tirelessly around the clock, often at significant peril and personal sacrifice, to secure our borders, enforce our laws, and ensure the fair and humane treatment of all, consistent with our values as a department and as a nation. I thank these and the many thousands of other dedicated public servants of DHS who serve and protect our country and the American people, no matter the challenge. I appear before you today having just completed my assignment as the Senior Coordinating Official with the Southwest Border Coordination Center on April 29th. On April 1st, as we all know, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention announced that, as of May 23, 2022, Title 42 Public Health Order will be terminated. Title 42 is not an immigration authority, but rather a public health authority used by the CDC to protect against the spread of communicable disease. I would like to discuss and share some of the steps the SBCC has taken to prepare for the termination of Title 42. First, the SBCC has implemented measures to secure additional resources via agreements with other federal agencies and contracts across 3 lines of effort: transportation, facilities, and personnel. This includes expanding holding, ground, and air transport capacity, increasing utilization of law enforcement officers from across the federal government, adding contract security guards and processing support staff, and expanding medical services. These efforts allow CBP officers and agents to perform their vital national security mission, as opposed to processing and other administrative work. Second, the SBCC and Customs and Border Protection field leadership have established recurring and operationally focused engagements with state, local, tribal, and law enforcement officials to share information, understand challenges, and coordinate actions on the ground. Additionally, in April, FEMA awarded $150 million in humanitarian funding to the National Board for the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. The National Board will award these funds to eligible state and local governments and nonprofit organizations that have aided or will aid individuals and families encountered by DHS at the southern border. These funds can be used for food, lodging, and transportation costs. Organizations will have the opportunity to request reimbursement on a quarterly basis, as well as to request advance funding. Organizations can apply for reimbursement of expenses back to January 1, 2022. Third, DHS launched the Southwest Border Technology Integration Program to digitize and automate non-citizen processing. Today, over 70% of Title VIII cases are reviewed and signed digitally by Customs and Border Protection, which saves up to 14 minutes per case. We project this has saved over 20,000 hours of agent time already. Additional efficiencies are being implemented specifically targeted at expedited removal, so non-citizens encountered at the border but can be quickly removed. Everything possible is being done to enable officers and agents to spend less time processing arrests and more time in the field. Fourth, the SBCC is rapidly developing and testing innovative models that will co-locate Customs and Border Protection, ICE, HHS, and non-governmental organizations at enhanced centralized processing centers to eliminate inefficiencies and process non-citizens. This model will allow CBP to swiftly triage non-citizens and encounters based on risk, ensuring that higher-risk individuals are held in secured, hardened facilities until they are placed in detention pending expedited removal. Fifth, the SBCC is working to alleviate overcrowding at CBP facilities by employing mobile in-route processing. Border Patrol is outfitting buses with necessary technology to support processing non-citizens while in transit. CBP can move non-citizens out of their facilities faster while retaining the integrity of biometric and biographic screening processes and ensuring non-citizens apprehended at the border are placed expeditiously into removal proceedings. Ultimately, the goal of these steps and other efforts focused on longer-term strategies to create lasting, scalable, repeatable structures to respond to irregular migration events. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Kearney. Our next witness is Chief Kari Huffman. Chief Huffman currently serves as the Acting Chief Operating Officer for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, ensuring that CBP is equipped with the personnel and resources necessary to carry out their frontline duties at and between ports of entry. Chief Huffman, who has served in the U.S. Border Patrol for over 3 decades, previously served as CBP's Acting Deputy Commissioner and Executive Assistant Commissioner of Enterprise Services. Chief Huffman, welcome to our committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. It is an honor to testify on behalf of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and discuss CBP's efforts to secure our borders and promote safe and efficient flow of lawful trade and travel. I currently serve as CBP's Acting Chief Operating Officer. However, my career in border security has spanned 37 years, the entire Western Hemisphere. While the border has always been a dynamic environment, there is one constant I am reminded of every day. The men and women of CBP have a complex, important, and frequently dangerous mission. One we are called to perform within the spirit of vigilance, service, integrity, and honor. It is in this spirit that CBP, while conducting our border security mission, remains the most humanitarian law enforcement agency in the country. Our border protection mission and ethos necessitate that we provide life-saving rescues, shelter, medical treatment, nourishment, and clothing to those we encounter. We regularly conduct rescue missions, deliver babies, feed children, and work with child care providers to ensure proper medical care. Notably, through extensive DHS and CBP efforts, we have created an unprecedented medical support and healthcare system inside a law enforcement agency. That's an unprecedented feat. Simultaneously, we remain vigilant and responsive to other border challenges and responsibility. Last year, CBP conducted more than 13,000 life-saving rescues in often extremely dangerous conditions and terrain. We continue to interdict hundreds of thousands of pounds of illicit narcotics, prevent dangerous people and goods from crossing our borders, enforce our nation's laws, and ensure the efficient flow of lawful trade and travel that is vital to our economy. These critical functions will continue when and if the CDC order, what we generally refer to as Title 42, comes to an end. CBP's operational response will be, as it is now, grounded in 3 key principles. First, enforce the law and implement administrative policies. Second, ensure individuals in our custody are provided care and afforded rights. And third, work collaboratively with our interagency and private sector partners. First, CBP is a law enforcement organization. We are committed to enforcing our nation's laws and implementing the policies of the executive branch. To that end, CBP will continue to utilize our immigration authorities under Title VIII, as we have done throughout our agency's history. These authorities include a range of enforcement options to hold individuals accountable for entering the U.S. illegally, including placing individuals into appropriate removal proceedings. They also allow non-citizens appropriate access to make asylum claims and provide for urgent port of entry humanitarian parole on a case-by-case basis. Which brings me to our second principle, the commitment to provide care and affording rights to individuals in our temporary custody. From the moment of initial contact with an individual, CBP procedures are designed to identify the correct processing pathway for that person, including appropriate options for those in vulnerable populations. Thanks to the support provided by Congress with FY22 funding, CBP is expanding temporary holding capacity, increasing the transportation of migrants away from overcrowded sectors for processing, and providing additional medical resources to protect the health and safety of migrants and, by extension, our personnel and our communities. Third, it is important to recognize the interagency efforts in this area. CBP is one of many organizations involved in addressing border security mission. Working together with our partners, CBP is making numerous preparations to ensure we can scale our operations as necessary to respond to the areas of greatest need. While I am here today representing one agency, I cannot stress enough the importance of Congress' continued support to the missions of not only CBP, but also ICE, USCIS, FEMA, HHS, the Department of State, the Department of Justice, and others. We are all part of a great number of efforts collaborating across the immigration spectrum. As evidenced by all the witnesses present, collaboration is key and support from Congress is vital. The border has always been a dynamic and complex environment. For CBP, we will continue to do our part in enforcing the law, ensuring individuals are properly cared for, and being a trusted partner to all other entities working on this effort. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Chief Hoffman. Our final witness is Emily Mandrella. Ms. Mandrella serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Department of State's Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, covering Cuba and regional migration. Ms. Mandrella previously served as Director of Legislative Affairs for the National Security Council and most recently served as Executive Director for the Center for Democracy in the Americas. Ms. Mandrella, welcome to the committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, distinguished members of the committee, I welcome the opportunity to testify regarding the Biden-Harris administration's priorities on regional migration. This is a pivotal moment for our hemisphere as we broaden the shared responsibility on humane migration management across the region. The Department of State is actively working with governments, the private sector, civil society, and international organization partners throughout the region to increase cooperation and address our shared responsibility to humanely manage migration and to provide protection for those fleeing persecution or torture. Regional leaders recently concluded a hemispheric ministerial meeting on migration and protection, co-hosted by Secretary Blinken in Panama, April 19th and 20th. Secretary Blinken urged collaboration on stabilization of migrant and refugee receiving communities. The ministerial shined a light on the need to work together with international organizations and multilateral development banks to stabilize those host communities. President Biden will host the 9th Summit of the Americas, June 8th to 10th in Los Angeles. As the only meeting of leaders from across the Americas, the summit serves as the most important forum to address our region's shared challenges and opportunities. The 9th Summit marks the first time the United States will host the event since the inaugural gathering in Miami in 1994. The theme of the 9th Summit, Building a Sustainable, Resilient, and Equitable Future, represents a shared vision developed with the region's governments, civil society, and private sector. The summit will produce concrete outcomes, including in responding to the pandemic, building strong and inclusive democracies, addressing irregular migration, and increasing equity and inclusion. The President announced our intent to adopt the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection as an expression of leaders' commitments to addressing irregular migration and forced displacement. The Department of State has worked diligently to implement the administration's comprehensive approach to migration, which includes, in addition to elements managed by my colleagues on the dais, the U.S. strategy for addressing root causes of migration in Central America and the collaborative migration management strategy. The Biden-Harris administration's comprehensive approach builds on both significant U.S. government resources and substantial private sector investments to support the long-term development of Central America. To advance the root causes strategy, the Vice President brought together private sector leaders through the U.S. government's Call to Action initiative that has generated more than $1.2 billion in commitments to create new jobs and opportunities for people in the region. As part of the Vice President's call to action, Microsoft is connecting 4 million people to broadband access across the region, with nearly 1 million already connected to date. Nespresso will invest $150 million to double the number of farmers it works with in the region, and MasterCard is bringing 5 million people into the formal financial economy while digitizing 1 million micro and small businesses. Parkdale Mills is investing $150 million to support a new yarn spinning facility in Honduras and an existing facility in Virginia, supporting 500 jobs in each location, demonstrating the effect that these efforts can bring benefits to the U.S. economy as well. Through these long-term efforts, the Biden-Harris administration continues to make significant progress toward creating hope for people in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras that a better life can be found at home. Highlights to date include the U.S. government's $300 million Central America Local initiative, empowering local organizations to address drivers of irregular migration in their own communities, also delivery of more than 15 million COVID-19 vaccines to Northern Central America. We also continue helping to hold migrant smugglers accountable and conduct programs to support victims of gender-based violence, survivors of human trafficking, and unaccompanied migrant children. New U.S. government programs and scholarships improve access to education for nearly 18,000 returning or potential migrants and at-risk youth. The administration is doing its due diligence to prepare for potential challenges at the border. We've alerted countries to the upcoming changes in processing and requested flexibility and cooperation with regional partners as regional migration flows change, including repatriating individuals without a legal basis to remain in the United States. The Department actively seeks to identify and respond to disinformation about migration. We work with interagency partners to track and combat disinformation, especially that circulated by smugglers about U.S. migration and border policy. I'll conclude again by underscoring the growing sense of shared responsibility across the region to work together with partners on a new approach to regional migration. Chairman Peters and Ranking Member Portman, members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mandrella, and thank you to each of our witnesses for your opening comments. I'm going to start questioning with discussion of Title 42, which I'm sure will be discussed quite extensively during this committee, and we'll have some other issues. But we know that Title 42 has severely limited border security enforcement strategies, like the consequence delivery system. The consequence delivery system started back in 2008 and was designed to impose escalating consequences on individuals who are crossing the border illegally. And quite frankly, it worked. And I have this chart to show how consequence delivery system worked. As you can see here from 2008 when it went into effect, these are folks that are coming across the border on a repeated basis, but it significantly decreased the number of folks coming across the border until you can see there in 2019, where we have a huge increase. That's when the Trump administration suspended the consequence delivery system to implement Title 42. So you can see once that happens with Title 42, a major spike once again going up of folks that are coming repeatedly over the border. Under Title 42, migrants are pushed back to Mexico with no consequences, and they have no reason not to keep trying. And they keep trying. They come back many, many times, as you can see that increase. And then it levels off. That flattening is with the Biden administration. It then flattened at that point. But you see this huge increase. Going back to the days before consequence was put in place, now we have incredible strain because of folks coming over constantly. In fact, since the start of fiscal year 2021, the Border Patrol has encountered more than 900,000 migrants that they have seen at least once before, but they've probably seen them many, many times as they keep trying over and over again. There are no consequences. That's been eliminated with Title 42. So they keep trying until they get through. And when Title 42 is terminated, it's my sense that consequences need to be in place, like expedited removal and prosecution to decrease these illegal crossings and these repeat offenders, which are skewing the numbers we see over here. It's just because people are coming over so many times, the numbers are up, and that's a consequence. Because the consequence system is gone, with Title 42, you start seeing a big increase there because of repeat offenders. So my question for Mr. Nunez-Neto, does the department plan to reinstate consequences to reduce the rate of repeat crossers who have taken advantage of Title 42 public health order?
Thank you for that question, Chairman. And you are exactly right that under Title 42, the
Microphone?
lack of any real consequences.
Sorry, would you start over, please?
Yeah, so thank you, Chairman, for the question. And you're exactly right that under Title 42, the lack of consequences leads to, roughly half of individuals being re-encountered subsequently. And we are committed to imposing consequences as part of the administration's plan that, again, is in my written testimony. Part of those consequences is really ramping up our use of expedited removal for those who are removable, and also doing a focused prosecution campaign on individuals whose conduct warrants it, and that includes individuals who are recidivists, who cross multiple times. It also includes individuals who may seek to evade capture. I would note one thing, Chairman, which is we've actually already begun implementing consequences for recidivists. It's starting about 2 months ago. We began an effort to identify Title 42 recidivists and start imposing expedited removal on them to levy a consequence, and we plan to continue to increase that in the coming weeks.
So if I can paraphrase, without these consequences, we're putting a real strain on our folks at the border because we've got people just coming over, sent back to Mexico. They come back later that day. They come back the next week, the 2 weeks, constantly. Huge strain. Once consequences are in place, we can reinstate that. Title 42 is allowing people to keep coming over and over again, constantly inflating these numbers. Now, once consequences put in place, you would expect to start seeing a decrease again, like we saw in the past, which seemed to be pretty successful prior to Title 42?
I think that's absolutely correct, sir.
Great. Title 42 has also eliminated the safest and most orderly pathway for asylum seekers to apply for protections. When asylum seekers are turned away at the ports of entry, which they are with the situation right now, then they're forced to cross between the ports instead of coming in the ports of entry. This clearly endangers themselves, but it also strains our border security folks because we're pushing folks away from the ports of entry to try other ways to get in. So my question for you, Chief Hoffman, could you please describe the specific steps that the administration is undertaking to increase our capacity at ports of entry so we can safely process asylum seekers, ensure efficient processing of trade and travel, and then allow the Border Patrol agents to carry out their law enforcement duties in between ports of entry?
Thank you for that question. I'd be glad to address that. Yes, it is part of the process to encourage asylum seekers to go back through the ports of entry if possible to do that. But in order to do that, we have to have the capacity to be able to process them as much as we can. To that end, we are doing a number of things to get ready to that and do that. We've actually processed over the last few months several exceptions to the File 42 already in preparation of this also. But we have detailed so far up to 255 additional personnel to the ports of entry on the southwest border to do that. We're working also to leverage better technology to do that with, using the CBP One app to encourage people to apply to get as much advanced processing information as possible as they arrive to the port of entry to increase the efficiencies. Because in order to increase efficiencies, there's really two ways. You either increase your footprints or you improve your processes. And the footprint is what it is at a port of entry. So we're going to have to work on improving our processes to improve our efficiencies. And OFO is working diligently to do that and are in preparation for that. But it's not without some concerns when the volumes arrive. That there's a good likelihood there could be longer lines. There could be some delays, slow things down. But the port directors have the authority to make the decisions, to form the lines as they need to, and use those things processed to move it as efficiently as they can. We're going to build on a lot of the past lessons we learned when this was going on previously and continue to process them through that way.
Thank you. Ranking Member Portman, recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I think we need to be straight with the American people as to what's happening here. And let me just comment, if I could, on your suggestion that there be consequences for people who enter multiple times and how that would address the problem. I think it's fine to have consequences, but that's not the issue. Agent, you just told us that you're preparing post-Title 42 not for people to have consequences for multiple entries, but for more asylum seekers, didn't you? That's what you just told us, right?
For those that come to the port of entry and make an application for asylum, yes, sir.
So you're expanding your capacity to deal with asylum. That's what's going to happen. I mean, the alternative to Title 42 is not that people are going to stay home. The alternative to Title 42 is that they're going to do what they cannot do now because of Title 42, which is apply for asylum. Do you disagree with that, Agent?
Sir, I don't think I understood your question.
What's the alternative to Title 42? It was suggested by Mr. Nunez Neto a second ago that the alternative to Title 42 is that repeat offenders in particular are not going to come over because they'll have consequences. The alternative that you stated is that you're going to have more people coming and applying for asylum. That's what you're preparing for, right?
Sir, we're prepared to allow whoever comes to the country, they can afford the access to our asylum system if they have a right to do so.
Right.
That's what we're required by law.
You're going to increase your capacity for it. That's what's going to happen, right?
Yes, sir. We intend to increase our capacity to process
but
whatever
answer my question, and let's just be honest here with the American people. Right now, Title 42 is the ability for you to say to about 1 million people a year, we're going to turn you back. And by the way, they aren't turned back to Mexico in cases where they're not from Mexico. You actually process them for roughly 40 hours, then you send them back to their country of origin. It might be Ecuador. So it's not what was described, and those people obviously are less likely to be repeat offenders because they're thousands of miles away. But what you are saying is that without Title 42, you're going to have a lot more people who come to the border and say, I have a credible fear, and like others, they'll be allowed to come into the country. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay. So, I mean, guys, we can talk about this and try to play politics with it and say the administration has all these plans and consequences matter, but the reality is we have an asylum system that is broken, and until we fix that, it's not going to be solvable post-Title 42. That Title 42 is not sustainable. I get that. It's a public health authority. It's not meant to be an immigration law, but it's all we have right now to keep the system from being totally overwhelmed and to keep not just 1 million people being released into the country every year who come unlawfully, claim asylum. Remember, 85% at the end, at least of Mexicans and Central Americans that we know of, are not given asylum, and yet they are not deported. The numbers we have are that there are 1.2 million migrants who have received a final order of removal, and we are removing 56,000 a year right now. That was the number in 2021. And that is less than 5%. So that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. I wish it were easier, but it's hard because we have to deal with the asylum issue. Mr. Nunez Neto, you were on this committee. You know this issue well. Do you disagree with anything that I've said?
Sir, I think it is clear that under current law, migrants who arrive at the border have the opportunity to claim asylum, and as a department and as a country, we enforce those laws. I think, as the Secretary noted yesterday,
let's just back up for a second, if you could, please. And I apologize, but we don't enforce the laws in the sense that what the laws say is that we're supposed to detain people pending the process of asylum, and we don't do that. We don't have the beds to do that. The expedited removals, in fact, in the budget for this year are reduced even further, specifically with regard to detention, which is mandated by law. So we don't do that, and we can't do that. You know you can't do that. We don't have the space, right? We have 24,000 beds. We're talking 1.2 million people who have been put into expedited removal. Is that correct?
I don't think we have ever had enough beds to detain everybody through the process, sir.
Maybe we haven't ever had enough beds, but isn't that the reality?
Yes, sir. We do not have enough detention capacity to hold everybody who's
according to
expedited
Secretary
way.
Mayorkas, not even close. Not even close to. I mean, we have 7,000 or 8,000 people a day coming to the border right now, unlawfully, and we have 24,000 beds. And because of social distancing, because of COVID, we have fewer beds even than that, I'm told, even though Title 42 is about to expire. With regard to COVID, we're still applying it to the beds. But that's another issue. The problem, I guess, that I'm trying to get at is that unless we fix the asylum system, there's no way to allow you, Agent Huffman, to do your job, and your men and women who I've talked to, and they're the ones that tell me they are scared to death of what's going to happen when Title 42 goes away, because there's no alternative. And the 6 pillars that were just talked about, again, we can go through this, but 1,000 new Border Patrol agents. My understanding is the budget asked for 300, something like that, so I guess you're going to take them from other places, including the border with Canada. In making processing work faster, enhanced processing on buses while people go into the interior, working with non-governmental organizations to process people faster. I mean, all that's fine. All that's fine, but it doesn't deal with the problem. It just puts more people into the system. And Secretary Mayorkas tells us there's a 6 to 8 year wait right now. In other words, the backlog is 1.6 million people waiting for their asylum claims to be adjudicated, and they're in the United States for 6 to 8 years before their case is resolved. Is that correct?
Sir, it is correct that people who are not detained on average take 5 or 6 years to go through the ER process. I would note, sir, if I may, that we have tried to tackle the asylum process through the asylum officer rule by executive action, but we would welcome a bipartisan effort on the Hill to work on this important issue.
Well, I would too, and there are ideas out there that are, I think, very promising. One would be to have an expedited adjudication process at the border. Senator Sinema was here earlier. She and Senator Cornyn have a proposal along those lines with processing centers. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's going to be expensive, but it's absolutely crucial to me that the last people coming in are the first people who are told, we understand that your country has issues and that the economics are a real problem. You look at the Migration Policy Institute here, indicates that between 75% and 91% of migrants who are coming to the border are coming for economic reasons. We get that. That's why the asylum policy is leading to adjudications of only 15% being accepted from the majority of these countries. So we've got to make that decision early, send people back home if they don't qualify, allow them in if they do, and that is what will send a message to the traffickers and to these families that it doesn't make sense to make this arduous and dangerous journey north. So I would love to work on that, but that's not what is being proposed here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. And just want to, if I clarify, maybe to put this simplify it a little bit as we discuss some solutions here, is when we talked about the consequence system, that really deals with the single adults that are coming across who aren't going to be able to, they aren't applying for asylum. They're just trying to get across the border. Under 42, they just get sent back, no consequences. They keep coming back. It drives those numbers up for those individuals. And so, well, most of them don't. It's they're just coming across from Mexico, and they're not going to be able to go through that process. It's going to be very difficult. Then there are the asylum seekers. You're absolutely right about that. That we have to deal with that process, and that's something Congress has to deal with. We have to come together and fix this, and I'm committed to working with you and others on that. I think we're reviewing some legislation together right now related to that so that we can deal with it, and I look forward to working with you to deal with that aspect of the problem. We got to deal with both of these problems together. I totally agree with you in that respect. I need to go to an Armed Services Committee to ask some questions, so I'm going to turn the gavel over to Senator Carper and recognize Senator Carper for his questions.
Yeah, thanks so much. If you give me the gavel, I may not want to give it back to you. So, I just want to welcome back to this committee a number of folks that are here as witnesses and staffing the witnesses. Welcome back, and thank you again for the great work you did here with our committee and for the work that you're doing today. My first question, actually 2 questions, are going to go to Secretary. Is it Mandrella? You pronounce it Mandrella or Mandrella?
Mandrella.
Thank you. Everyone on this committee, ma'am, knows, just about everybody knows I'm a pretty big root cause guy. I always focus on what is the root cause, not just the symptoms of problems, but it's a topic I bring up frequently when talking about migration at our southern border, and that's because until we address the root causes of migration, like crime, like corruption, like lack of economic opportunity, we're going to continue to see folks arriving at our border for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years to come. I believe that building strong diplomatic relations with countries in the Western Hemisphere is a critical part to stemming the flow of migration in the long term. I just ran into Ken Salazar, former senator, former Secretary of the Interior. He's in town, and he's now our ambassador to Mexico. He was in the Dirksen building, in the cafeteria having breakfast. And I had a chance to talk with him a little bit yesterday, and they said, I want to come down to Mexico and the Northern Triangle sometime later this year, and maybe bring some of our colleagues with me. But anyway, we talked a bit about root causes. I'm still a big root cause guys, but I think building strong diplomatic relations with countries in the Western Hemisphere is a critical part to stemming the flow of migration in the long term, not just the short term, but the long term. And we got to work in lockstep with countries in the region to ensure that we're doing all we can to address the push and pull factors that force so many of them to flee. With that in mind, Secretary Mandrella, could you please take a moment to update us on the State Department's diplomatic efforts to tackle the root causes, some of the root causes, not all, but some of the root causes, and engage with countries in the region? Go right ahead.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. President Biden, through an executive order in February of last year, directed the Department of State to work across the interagency to draft a strategy to address root causes of migration, recognizing that we have engaged in efforts to address root causes in Central America before. He directed us to learn lessons, apply those lessons, and to put in place a strategy to do it better. He directed that alongside several other aspects of a comprehensive approach to regional migration, including reforms at the border and another line of effort that we call the Collaborative Migration Management Strategy. And this is a strategy to manage migration along with regional partners, strengthen border enforcement in the region, promote a sense of shared responsibility, strengthen protection systems in countries throughout the region as well. On the root causes strategy, we drafted and published a strategy last summer to address root causes of migration such as insecurity, lack of economic opportunity, and governance issues. And we have been working in partnership with governments in the region, civil society, private sector actors as well to implement that. I'll share with you a few highlights of the first year of our work. I mentioned in my testimony the Vice President announced and is working with private sector leaders on the call to action, promoting investment from private sector entities in Central America that can create jobs and improve standards of governance as well. The call to action has secured $1.2 billion in commitments from private sector actors to invest in Central America. Those commitments will generate 70,000 jobs in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Additionally, two other highlights I'll share is that we have allowed for access to education for 18,000 young people in Central America through scholarship opportunities, and 70,000 business owners access to credit. This is in addition to efforts that we are conducting through our Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement to train police on better and more humane security tactics, more efficient security tactics as well. It is a commitment of the Biden-Harris administration to, as we are working to address root causes of migration, to make sure that our efforts to promote strong governance is a through line and underpinning everything that we do, recognizing that without gains in governance, without governments that can provide for their people, gains in the security realm and the economic realm will not be sustained.
Other than that, though, that's a pretty good list, really.
Thank you.
Are there, very briefly, are there any additional pathways available to expand in-country processing to other migrant groups, especially those that would inevitably end up at our border? That would be for Mr. Nunez Neto, and again for you, Madam Secretary. That question, please. Go ahead. Any additional pathways available to expand in-country processing to other migrant groups, especially those that might end up at our border? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. We have been working to expand our ability to issue H-2A and B visas in the region. I think our also enhancing refugee processing in the region. That said, I think we do have under current law limited legal pathways, and one of the things that I think we would really want to work with Congress on is the ability to better match workers in the region with the badly needed jobs that we have in the U.S.
All right, thank you. And Secretary Mandrella, anything else you would add? Additional pathways to expand in-country processing to other migrant groups?
We recognize that legal pathways is a critical component of the strategy to effectively manage migration throughout the region. And these are pathways to the United States as well as to elsewhere, other countries that are standing up legal pathways, temporary work opportunities, et cetera. I'll mention a program run by my colleagues in the Bureau of Populations, Refugees, and Migration, and it's the Central America Minors Program. In September 2021, the State Department and Department of Homeland Security expanded the eligibility categories for U.S.-based relatives who can apply for their children in Northern Central America to access the Central America Minors Program. This is a legal pathway for individuals to apply from their home country to access the United States. And then, as Assistant Secretary Nunez-Neto mentioned, we are also working to expand temporary work visas to the United States and encouraging countries around the world to also stand up and augment their own temporary work opportunities for individuals from Northern Central America.
All right. My thanks to both of you for those responses. And I think the next person in line is from Oklahoma, James Langford. Senator Langford, you're next. And if she returns, I think Senator Sinema would follow you. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Senator
You're
Carper.
recognized.
Thanks to all of you and being here. I've got a bunch of questions, and so if I could ask everyone to be brief in your responses on it, let me try to go through several things on this. Let me start with the Deputy Assistant Secretary Mandrella. There are ads that are up on radio ads and such encouraging folks not to do migration in the United States. Does the State Department actually run those, yes or no?
Encouraging individuals not to migrate to the United States?
Yes.
The State Department does have robust messaging efforts throughout the region. It depends on where you're talking about, but some of them, yes.
Yeah, Northern Triangle, as far as Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador on those. Could we get the budget for those and also the copy, the text for those on it? That would be very helpful for us to be able to see what's actually being used.
I'd be happy to follow up.
Thank you. There's I talked to Secretary Mayorkas recently, and we were talking about his 6-point plan that he's put out, which I have some significant questions on. There's a section of it in the 6-point plan that says they're going to work with countries in Central America on trying for them to be able to enforce their borders as well and also have asylum seekers there. I asked him the question of what leverage are you using on those countries to encourage them to actually enforce their borders? His response to me was State Department actually is in charge of that. So let me ask State Department, what leverage are you using to encourage countries in Central America for them to enforce their borders? What are you doing there for them to stop irregular migration that's just passing through their country and heading north?
We have strong partnerships with countries in Central America, and many of them are enforcing their borders for their own reasons and through their own to protect their own national interests. During COVID-19, the height of the pandemic, many of the countries imposed public health requirements, additional document checks and additional public health requirements that prevented transit through their borders for public health reasons, for example. We are supporting, through our foreign assistance, training of border personnel, for example, to train them on more effective and more humane enforcement tactics. But I would say that most of the countries in the region are conducting those enforcement actions out of their own national self-interest.
So there's no increased engagement with them to be able to put leverage on them? Because obviously we had 2 million people encountered, quote unquote, coming across our border last year, many of those from literally all over the world, many of them coming through Central America. So is there an additional effort that's coming to be able to slow down that quantity? The 6-point plan implies there's something new.
Oh, absolutely. We are engaging with them on a regular basis out of Washington, trips down to the region through our embassies on a range of priorities, including border enforcement, including accepting back repatriations of their nationals who have no legal basis to remain in the United States, and also to identify emerging trends and identify needs associated with those emerging trends.
But that's not additional border enforcement. That is repatriation. That's others. I'm asking specifically what's in the plan, what State Department is doing to put leverage on countries to enforce their own borders. You talked about training that you've done in the past, things that they did during COVID years ago. We still had 2 million people last year, many of those crossing through those borders. What are we doing now to encourage those countries to enforce their borders?
Well, for example, when we notice a trend working with interagency partners of a certain nationality that's arriving in larger numbers at our border, we will carry that information, including the routes that those individuals are transiting, to countries throughout the region and look for areas of partnership. If they're arriving by air, countries may decide through their own sovereign decision-making process to impose visas on those nationalities that are arriving by air that can and that have been proven to be conduits to large flows of irregular migration, to impose visas on those nationalities to make sure that those that are arriving by air are not intending migrants to the United States. And we also know that if one country imposes a visa requirement, it's very easy for those routes to be diverted elsewhere. So we make sure that we are alerting and working in partnership with countries throughout the region so that that route is not diverted.
Great. Could you get us that plan, that idea? Because again, I go back to that's helpful, by the way, on the visa piece and people flying in, but people that are walking across borders, and we're seeing that border to border to border to border at times. We've all talked about this for years. If they don't enforce their borders, it's much harder to enforce ours. What I'm trying to get to is what is State Department doing to provide leverage to countries to say, stop, actually enforce your border. It's different than training. It's different than visas and all that. And if we can just get that in writing, that'd be very helpful to me. And we'll follow up with that. Assistant Secretary Nunez-Neto, it's good to see you again. When you and I visited in February, I believe, when you were in my office, we had talked back and forth about the guidance that you've provided to Border Patrol agents, USCIS asylum officers to evaluate claimed vulnerabilities during the screenings to determine whether a migrant should be placed in MPP. I asked for that. You said, no problem. Just as a heads up, it's May. I don't have that yet. And so if I could get that, my office will follow up with you on that request again. But that'd be very helpful to be able to get that. We're trying to be able to figure out the usefulness of the MPP and the way that screening is actually done. And the officers, when I was there in February, getting a chance in January to be able to visit with the officers on the ground, they were fuzzy about it. I came back to ask what's being handed, and you said, yes, there is guidance. I just haven't seen it yet. So can I get that?
We will certainly follow up with your office on that, sir, and happy to provide a briefing and the documents we were able to.
The documents would be great to be able to get on that. So you had just mentioned earlier to Senator Portman in your conversation that we don't have enough bed space. It's interesting to me in the budget proposal that DHS has put out, they actually request 5,000 fewer beds for single adults and 2,500 fewer beds for family units. Your testimony is we don't have enough beds. The budget request is we need even fewer. And I'm trying to figure out still, when there's the ongoing discussion about May the 23rd, that on May the 23rd, the plan is to end Title 42 at the border because there's no COVID at the border, but we still have restrictions on our detention facilities that we can't use every bed because there's still COVID in the detention facilities, but not COVID at the border. So Title 42 is going away at the border, but we can't hold them. We've got to just wave them through to be able to come through and can do detention. It's a double hit here. You're still limiting the number of people that can be held in detention, and you're asking for fewer beds while you're saying we need more bed space. I'm just trying to figure this out.
So to be clear, Senator Portman asked whether we had the ability to detain everybody we encountered, and my response was that the department has actually never had enough beds to do that. You know, we are focused right now on reviewing every step of the expedited removal process to try to compress the timeline. It takes historically 6 to 8 weeks to remove people in expedited removal who, you know, either are found not to have a fear or who appeal that decision and have the no fear finding upheld by an immigration judge. That's just too long, frankly, and it's been the historical average. So we are really working to maximize the beds we have by getting people through the process much faster. But, one of the challenges we have, frankly, is that a quarter of our encounters right now are from countries we really can't remove people to, and we just do not have good options for, individuals from Venezuela, from Cuba, and from Nicaragua, where we just don't have the agreements in place with those governments to remove people, even if an immigration judge does find that they are not, they don't merit asylum.
Senator Langford, I'm going to have to ask you to hold it at that point. And, but there'll be a second round, I understand, and you may want to take advantage of that. All right, Senator Sinema's joined us, and you're recognized, please. 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Yesterday, this committee heard from Secretary Mayorkas regarding the DHS plan for handling the expected influx of migrants. I have not heard the detail I need to be confident in the government's plan. In order to meet this moment, DHS needs to be able to share operational details regarding how they plan to move migrants through the processing system in a manner that will keep Arizona communities safe and treat migrants fairly and humanely. So, Ms. Tierney, Arizona communities, NGOs, and local and federal law enforcement officers have been struggling to keep up with the flow of migrants for years. Yesterday, Secretary Mayorkas indicated that work to get resources on the ground in Arizona are well underway. I've not yet received specific details that allow me to be confident the government will be prepared. On which date will Arizona border sectors have all the necessary resources, including sufficient infrastructure, transportation, and staffing, to implement the administration's plan and avoid further burdening Arizona's local communities?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the 3 lines of effort that you referenced. The first thing I want to discuss is personnel. We are in the process of moving additional federal law enforcement officers across the southwest border to include Arizona, in particular the Yuma and Tucson sectors, which, as you know, have seen substantial increases in migration flows. There's also an effort to provide civilian contract processing staff, in particular to Yuma, that will allow Border Patrol agents to then go back out on the line. And then the third piece is the medical piece, to plus up the medical resources in Arizona as well. That is a mix of interagency support and contracting support that is online and coming online with the goal of having things in place prior to May 23rd. So that's for personnel. The second piece is transportation. So Customs and Border Protection has undertaken several efforts to address transportation, in particular air and ground transport. This, again, is a mix of interagency agreements and contracts. One of the biggest pieces of air transport is an interagency agreement with ICE to use their air transport to move migrants either laterally or to decompress the stations. In particular, again, I'll focus on Yuma because that is with a consistently overcapacity sector in the Border Patrol Southwest Border System. Also, ground transport. Currently, CBP has the capacity to move about 4,900 people a day. That is being plussed up to be almost 9,000 people per day, again, through a mix of interagency agreements and contracts. The one I'll particularly note is a blanket purchase agreement that was awarded on April 29th, and task orders are already being issued against that based on sector requirements. I also want to note a part of that blanket purchase agreement includes contract security guard services. This is important because a lot of the things that Border Patrol agents do while people are in holding don't have to be done by Border Patrol agents. And so swapping out contract security services for a Border Patrol agent will allow those agents to go back out on the line. So that's another part of that blanket purchase agreement. Again, task orders are being issued against that right now. And then the last thing is facilities. There has been a plus up in holding capacity across the southwest border. Previously, it was about 13,000. Now, as of today, it's 17,161. And on May 23rd, there will be additional 500 soft side facility holding spaces available in Del Rio, Texas. I know not specifically to Yuma or Tucson, Arizona, but you have to think about this kind of a system where there's an opportunity to do lateral movements to decompress overcrowded stations. So in closing, again, things are in place now. Things are coming online with the goal of having more resources available on May 23rd, but additional capability to scale up after May 23rd based on actual flows.
I appreciate what you just said, but to be clear, we've read all of this in your report. So what I'm asking for are specific details regarding Arizona. Telling me what's happening in Texas and saying that you can move people from Arizona to Texas doesn't actually solve the problem. Do you have specific Arizona details?
I have top line details here. I do not have specific Arizona details, but we can certainly get you that offline. I do want to note again, it's a system, and so Yuma, Tucson are a part of a network of sectors on the southwest border, and I do encourage you to look at the whole system, not just specifically what's in Arizona, in particular with holding capacity, because that's where the air and ground transport contracts and plussing up those contracts will help with the lateral decompression.
I appreciate that. As you are aware, we've had significant problems with transport in Arizona already, with continuing concerns around migrants showing up at the Sky Harbor Airport, for instance, without appropriate travel plans. And airport personnel have been taken away from their duties of helping passengers get safely from one destination to another to provide assistance to migrants. And as you mentioned before the hearing, some of that has been alleviated. It has not been solved. It doesn't sound like there is a very specific plan with actionable items to address this prior to May 23rd.
Well, Senator, I do want to, thank you for that comment and question. I do want to highlight some of the things that have happened, and specifically around the Sky Harbor Airport, which I know is a particular pain point for the airport, the county, and something that you've raised multiple times. Our lead field coordinator, which is the senior CBP official on the ground in Arizona, has convened detailed operational discussions with both the jurisdiction in which Sky Harbor Airport is, as well as the airport, to discuss how they can better coordinate their actions. And from that, a few things have happened. The first one is the identification of a site for drop-offs that's not specific to the airport, working with the primary NGO that provides the drop-off services there. There's also been work with TSA to discuss security clearance processes to ensure that people who do arrive have the right documentation and that TSA has access to the right system so that they can properly screen people without delay, avoiding people missing their flight and then having to be stuck at the airport for several hours or a day or two. Another issue is ticketing. And so the lead field coordinator has convened discussions with both Southwest Airlines and I believe it was United Airlines, to discuss how to better coordinate ticketing as well as moving people through the airport to their gate. So there are things that have been done tactically to address these issues. And as we discussed before the hearing, and as I will highlight here, is it completely solved? No, it is not. But there are a lot of things in process and also completed to have alleviated some of the issues. I do want to note, though, there is, as we discussed it before the hearing, a limit to what we can do, because once people are processed out of CBP custody, the federal government has few levers to actually provide support. And so there is a lot of coordination that will have to happen between CBP, the non-governmental organizations, the local officials, and entities like the Sky Harbor Airport to ensure that we can move people through the system and avoid some of the pain points that you have highlighted previously.
Mr. Chair, I know that my time has expired. Might I be able to ask one additional question?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. So my next question is for Mr. Nunez-Neto. Street releases are not new to Arizona communities. For years, I've been working with Arizona's local mayors and our counties to help relieve the burden caused by these street releases. The DHS plan indicates that there is defined criteria in place which our local CBP officers will use to determine whether and how to perform street releases in particular communities. So what is the criteria that DHS is utilizing to make these decisions about street releases, and what steps will be taken to minimize the burden that's placed on Arizona communities in the case of street releases?
Thank you, Senator. I'd welcome also Chief Huffman's views on this. You know, we are working hard to minimize the potential for street releases. We acknowledge that they have happened, you know, really consistently over the years when particular parts of the border become overstretched. We have put guidelines in place. We'd be happy to share with you, more detailed information on that. I think in general, the safety of the community and public safety is kind of the North Star in this space, and we try to ensure, if there is a need to release migrants, that we do so, as Marianne noted, in direct coordination with local NGOs and local authorities in order to make sure that they have somewhere to go and a place to sleep. Chief Huffman, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I just concur with what, if we have time to go answer the question. I just concur with what Mr. Nieto answered, that the local CBP officials and local, they work closely with the local officials. They understand the stress this burdens it, but as we all know, CBP is just the first step, and when you encounter somebody, and once the systems just get so strained, sometimes you have to make the choices of those releases. And so when you have to do so, you do so in coordination with the NGOs if they're available in general, and make sure you're in coordination with your state and locals. But obviously, we'd like to not have any street releases if we could avoid it at all.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time's expired. I just will note that there have been repeated stories in Arizona, including the mayor of a small town in Arizona called Gila Bend, in which there are no shelters and no bus stops. That mayor was actually transporting migrants himself to the Phoenix area because of street releases that were unplanned and unannounced. So I have grave concern that this will continue to be a burden on local Arizona communities. Additionally, leaving migrants without any place to go, without safe harbor, particularly as summer temperatures rise over 110 in southern Arizona. Mr. Chairman, I have an additional 12 questions that I'll submit for the record, and I'm interested in hearing a lot more about these plans. As of this moment, I do not feel confident that the system is ready for this mass migration that could occur as early as May 23rd. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. Senator Scott, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'm from the state of Florida. We have quite a few people have moved to our state from foreign countries, and we like immigration. But what's going on in Florida right now, people, they have no belief that our federal government has secured our border. They have no belief that there's a plan to secure our border. They are seeing friends and some families lose their lives because of the unbelievable increase in drug overdose with the fentanyl that's coming across the border. They read the stories about the number of terrorists that have been caught, and they know that there are so many people that have not been caught, so they assume there's a lot of terrorists that have come in the country since Joe Biden got elected, and none of this seems to get any better. CBP encountered 221,000 illegal immigrants along the southwest border in March, a 33% increase compared to February, and the highest number in 22 years. Most concerning is the encountering of a historic number of illegal aliens from countries beyond Mexico and the Northern Triangle, who now represent nearly 40% of all border encounters in March. In contrast to fiscal 2012, encounters of foreign nationals originating from outside Mexico and the Northern Triangle were 2% of encounters. In fiscal 2021, the figure had increased to 22%. First off, Mr. Nunez-Neto, how many countries are there, and how many countries are representing people that are coming across our border illegally now?
Thank you, Senator. It is, common each year to see individuals from dozens of nationalities at our border. I think what's changed is just the sheer volume from countries we don't traditionally receive people from, and predominantly that has been this year Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, which account for about a quarter of our encounters.
So how many countries are represented? How many countries are there in the world, and how many countries are represented of people that have come across illegally that Border Patrol has picked up?
I don't have the specific number in front of me, but it is normally, in the high dozens.
So there are about 200 countries in the world, depending on who you asked. And the DOREAL sector reported that last fall that migrants from 106 countries crossed their sector in fiscal 2021. That's just one of 9 southern border sectors. Ranking Member Portman said in March that there are people coming over the border this year from 150 countries. The numbers are staggering and reveal a fact that cannot be ignored. This isn't a regional problem. Apprehensions of illegal aliens from distant countries like Syria, Lebanon, Romania, India, Turkey prove that the Biden administration's radical border policies have sent a clear message to the world. Come across our southern border, it's wide open. The rest of the world clearly believes that if you can get to the southern border, you can come across. So, Mr. Nunez-Neto, do you believe our southern border is closed?
As the Secretary noted yesterday, Senator, there's no doubt that we are facing severe challenges on our border. I would note that it is in line with historical trends to see large numbers of countries encountered at the border. But again, the key difference that we are currently seeing are just the large numbers of individuals from countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and Brazil, and Haiti that we are not accustomed to seeing at the land border.
Is the border closed?
The border has and continues to present a challenge for us.
So do you think our country has a right to have a secure border? Because, look, I mean, Secretary Marcus has come and testified, I don't see anything happening. I mean, if I'm a business guy, if I went into business and you saw a 33% increase in something bad happening, somebody would do something. I was down in the Arizona border a few months ago, and what the Border Patrol told me is this is the first administration that they can't say that they can see anything happening. I mean, it's just fascinating to me. I mean, we got people dying. About 1 out of every 3,000 people in this country died of a drug overdose last year. It's staggering. So let me go to Ms. Mandrella. So the Biden administration is supposedly having talks with Cuba now. So I'm from Florida. We have a lot of people that are Cuban descent. They know the atrocities of the Castro regime for decades. They were furious when the Obama administration had their appeasement, which didn't work. I can tell you story after story. I can tell you one story of a lady I know that after Obama's appeasement, the Castro regime cut off her hand, stuck in the mud so she would die of infection. And you know what her atrocity was? She complained that somebody closed a school in her area. And now we're back. My understanding is we're back talking to them again, we're talking about the same appeasement stuff that's going to do nothing. We have 1,300 people in Cuba prisons right now that peacefully protest last July 11th. Some of these are kids. They're being tortured. They are going to die. I have not seen one thing the Biden administration has done. I've called the White House. The White House has not done one thing to call this out. And now my understanding is you're having conversations with Cuba. So are you going to take them off the state sponsor of terrorism list? Are you going to take away the sanctions? This doesn't make any sense to anybody I know and have watched all the atrocities and have had their family members put in prison for doing nothing.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And I will say that we absolutely share your concerns about the human rights situation on the island. And President Biden himself, Secretary Blinken, and several other officials from the State Department and elsewhere in the administration have publicly condemned human rights violations.
No. Joe Biden has not said one word. I called Joe Biden. I called the White House and they hung up on me. Joe Biden has not said one word about the atrocities. He's not said one word about these 1,300 protesters. I asked him to do it. He will not do it. And by the way, I asked when this was going to happen, I said, you got to get the internet back on. And they said, oh, yeah, we're going to work on that. There's been nothing done. Or is there anything being done to get the internet back on? So these peaceful protesters, or the other protesters can talk to each other? Nothing. They said, oh, yeah, we're going to work on it. That was last July. Not one thing has happened.
Senator, I'd be happy to follow up with you to share some of the statements that have been made publicly by administration officials.
Joe Biden.
I'll share that we absolutely share your concerns about the human rights situation on the island, the political prisoners, those that were protesting peacefully July 11th and desired to in days following and before that were arrested, remained in prison, many of them with harsh sentences, as you rightly point out, some of them minors. We have made those concerns publicly, and we share those directly with them as well.
I'd like to see where it is, because I haven't seen it. The president hasn't said a word. Number two, are you taking them off are you going to take away the sanctions? Or are you going to take them off the terror watch list?
With respect to the migration accords or the migration talks that occurred a couple weeks ago, the U.S. and Cuba over several years, over several decades, brokered migration accords, 84, 94, 95, and 2017, to commit both sides to several measures that would promote safe, legal, and orderly migration. And administrations for decades now have met on a biannual basis at a technical level to discuss the implementation of the accords. And the meeting that occurred a couple weeks ago was a resumption of those migration talks to discuss compliance with the migration accords on both sides to promote safe, legal, and orderly migration. As you know, the challenges of Cuban outflow of migration is tremendous at this moment. Individuals spending their life savings, risking their lives in many respects, subjected to mistreatment by smugglers and traffickers as they make their way overland to arrive in an irregular fashion at our border. And so it's imperative that we work together with partners throughout the region and
So
speak
that means
directly
that's
with
a yes
the Cubans.
then. That's a yes that's on the table, that you're going to take away the sanctions.
Oh, no, sir. I'm responding specifically to your question about
My question
the
is,
migration
are you going to
talks.
take them off the terrorist watch, are state-sponsored terrorism, and are you going to eliminate the sanctions?
Oh, sir, I have no comment on either of those.
So that's, if you have no comment, that's a yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all the witnesses for being here. Of course, we had Secretary Mayorkas yesterday, and as I said to the Secretary, it really was disappointing that only after the administration announced that Title 42 restrictions would be lifted at the border did DHS release a plan to Congress for dealing with the change in policy and, of course, the expected surge at our border. It's also concerning that the plan seems to lack important details about how the administration is going to make sure that our border is secured. Moreover, things like surging resources to the border and improving coordination between NGOs and government solutions that DHS, well, frankly, that they've just offered in the past. So what I want to know from all of you here today is what the department has learned since the 2+ years since Title 42 took effect, and how this plan differs from DHS past policies and practices. So, Ms. Kearney, I'll start with you, then Mr. Nunez-Nato, and Mr. Hoffman, please.
Senator, thank you for that question. I think something that, I work at FEMA, and so my involvement in immigration day-to-day is limited, although for the past year I have had some involvement. I think a key thing that I will note is that the Southwest Border Coordination Center has brought together departmental components as well as the interagency to coordinate their actions in a way that perhaps may not have been done before. And through that, we have better aligned our priorities. We have identified specific objectives and tasks, and every day a team of dozens is working vigorously to execute against those tasks. And that's why in the past, I would say 45 to 60 days, there has been a substantial plus up in both the acquisition of resources as well as the deployment of resources. There has also been a significant movement in several policy areas, which Assistant Secretary Nunez-Nato could go into. So that is one key thing that I think is different and has improved outcomes come May 23rd.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Senator. I think there's a number of lessons that have been learned over the last 2 years. I think, starting with the fact that, because of the lack of consequences under Title 42, the number of people who just keep trying to come back, is really extraordinarily high, and that puts a lot of strain on the system. So the need to have consequences for those who don't have a legal basis to stay in the country, I think, is a key lesson learned. I think additionally, as our senior coordinating official, Marianne Kearney, just noted, there are a number of initiatives underway to really kind of look at the system from beginning to end and find efficiencies at every step of the process, from encounter to referral between CBP and ICE to how ICE manages expedited removal in its facilities. One of the things that has been a historical issue for not just DHS but also DOJ is the fact that all of our immigration processes are paper-based, and the printing out and scanning of documents takes an extraordinary amount of time and pulls our frontline law enforcement personnel away from their law enforcement duties. So we are working to digitize the notices to appear and to create an electronic A-file that will, I think, have really kind of revolutionize the way we process at the border. We hope to have a lot of this done by the end of the year, and I think we will see huge gains across the entire immigration continuum as part of that.
Thank you. Ms. Kearney, do you have anything to add?
And again, thank you for the question. So, as you know, CBP is the is the first, just one agency in the overall continuum that works the border security issues, and we're usually the first one to encounter people, and then we're kind of in the process of having to deal with them first. But the ultimate pathways of where they go is dependent upon other parts of the program. So I think one of the key lessons that we've learned, and this started back in 2019 when we first saw a big push, is that the shifting demographics of who we deal with, from going from single adults to family units back to single adults, is very challenging to have the right type of facilities to do the processing, to the temporary custody, those kind of things. So that turned out to be a big challenge across the board, because historically we were built to deal with single adults. That's how our system has worked, and that's how our facilities were worked. So we learned how to quickly scale up and change that. And we started using the soft-sided facilities a lot, and we were able to configure those soft-sided facilities in order to work better for us, to be able to detain and process and then move on to the next stage for those things. So that was key to us. As Mr. Nieto mentioned, the improving our processes in between the organizations, in between the move them from the technology issues to get away from paper and start switching to digital. Those are important. But I think one of the key things that I think is important is that this is kind of one of the first times where CBP has not felt we're in the fight alone for this situation. We seem like to have a better whole of government approach this time, and so that's really helpful. It helped us last spring and summer when we're dealing with an extremely large number of unaccompanied children to finally get fully coordinated in a unified team to process this thing. That same process is we're using now as we get ready for for Title 42 to go away, because we are dealing with unprecedented numbers. There's no question about that. I'm probably the only guy that was on the job here in 1986, and we set the first record of 1.6 million encounters that year, which was very, very difficult to do, and we've gone through several like that. But over the time, we've learned how to take better care of those in our custody, how to process faster, but also to make sure we have all the team players involved in it, from within the Homeland Security, plus DOJ's, Department of State, all involved to help us deal with the situation.
Well, thank you, because I do think we have to take these lessons learned into a coordinated whole-of-government approach, turn them into an action plan like digitizing so you can share better across agencies, being able to modernize our facilities. But we have to have a plan that's robust, coordinated, and humane and dignified. And so I look forward to working with you on that. I'm going to submit my next question for the record, because all of this really begs the need for comprehensive immigration reform that really does take these lessons learned and turn them into a humane, dignified, robust action plan, not only at our border, but for our immigration as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got dueling charts here. I don't expect you to be able to read all the detail here, but a picture does paint 1,000 words. Just so you know, the gold is single adults, blue are family units, red are unaccompanied children. What we have here is 10 years worth of monthly apprehensions. And what's interesting about this, I kind of told the story yesterday with Secretary Mayorkas, but let me tell a slightly different story. Over the last 8.5 years, on average, we had about 30,000 single adults being apprehended at the southwest border monthly, about 30,000. Very steady. What we had in 2014 was the humanitarian crisis of unaccompanied children and family units exploiting our asylum laws. Same thing happened in 2019. Something different is happening now. First thing, you'll see an explosion in single adults. Now, we're hearing this yesterday and again today that they want to explain this away as from repeat offenders. The chairman's chart showed 25% of the apprehensions were repeat offenders. This is from 30,000 to well over 150,000. Chief Huffman, do repeat offenders account for going from an average of 30 to over 150,000 single adults being apprehended on a monthly basis?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I believe you're correct. The math doesn't add up to accomplish. I mean, there is a significant amount of recidivism folks involved in the Title 42s. We know that.
We have recidivism back here, too, right?
Yes, sir. And going all the way back to when we were counting to 1986, recidivism are in all those numbers. There's no question about that.
So there's something else going on here. Let me suggest where you really started seeing the single adults increase was during the 2020 presidential debates, when every Democrat presidential candidate said they weren't going to deport anybody and they're going to offer people free health care. Now, again, if you look at the chart, I mean, there's some pretty remarkable breakpoints. For example, number of apprehensions dropped precipitously right after President Trump was elected. People thought our laws were going to change. We're going to tighten up the border, so they stopped coming. They found out, no, nothing really changed, and they started surging. Then President Trump did real consequences. Return to Mexico was a real consequence, and it worked. It pretty well stopped the flow of unaccompanied children and family units exploiting our asylum laws, and all that we were left with were single adults until the Biden administration. And once again, family units and unaccompanied children exploiting our asylum laws took off. So we've just been nibbling around the edges. This is surreal the last 2 days, what we've been talking about here. Nothing that's going to fix the problem until we actually talk about the root cause. And the root cause is the credible fear standard. It is so low in comparison to what the asylum standard is. Getting asylum is actually quite difficult, isn't it, Mr. Nunez-Neto? You have to be persecuted or fear persecuted, being persecuted on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. That is the asylum standard, correct? Economic migration doesn't count, correct?
Sir, you are right that there is a wide difference between the statutorily mandated credible fear interview at the beginning of the process.
And that is the root cause of the problem, right? Because the vast majority of people that come in here, they are coached to say that you're afraid to go home, credible fear, and they get waved in, never to have their claim adjudicated, and we have somewhere between 20 and 30 million people in this country undocumented because of that fact. The credible fears bar is so low in comparison to what the actual asylum standard is, and until we fix that, we're going to continue to have this kind of flow, particularly with an administration that's not willing to do what the previous administration did and offer a real consequence. Real quick, what are those consequences we stopped talking about? I mean, the main consequence is expedited removal. We're still doing that, correct?
Yes, sir. We are still using expedited removal.
So the only other consequence we're talking about is we're not writing down their name. And I don't know, we used to actually remove them like 100 miles or quite a few miles away from the entry point. That was a consequence. Do we do that anymore, Chief Huffman?
Yes, sir. We're still having some interior repatriation flights. When the flights are available, we can do that. We are. Yes, sir. That's correct.
So that's still a consequence. So again, we're still doing some consequences. We still have expedited removal. We're still doing that, and we'll still have that flow. So I guess my question, first of all, for Ms. Mandrella, you talked about disinformation in South America. What is that disinformation?
Sir, thank you for the question, Senator. We've seen smugglers and other bad actors use information, twist information, craft disinformation about U.S. border policies in such a way to...
Specifically, what do they tell them?
We've seen information that would suggest that that certain nationalities would be granted entry without consequence to the border.
Okay, so let me stop you right there. Isn't that exactly what's happening here? People are granted entry without consequence. Last year, close to 1 million processed and dispersed. Another few 100,000 known gotaways because we're so overwhelming Customs Border Patrol. We're not going to fix this unless we're honest. So the reality is, what the people are being told in Central America is largely true. You come to America, you cross the border, you say, I'm afraid to go home, and you are home free. Isn't that the reality, Chief Huffman? Isn't that exactly what the agents on the border are having to grapple with? There's nothing they can do because that is the policy of this administration, process and disperse.
So I'll speak to what I think the agents up front, and without regards to the policy, I'll defer that to the DHS policy. But there's a level of frustration because they believe that many people are, quote, gaming the system or making fears they may not really have because it's possible to do that. Ideally, though, we'd like to focus those are single adults that we do have a clear path for removal, that we can put into expedited removal. They can have those claims assessed. That's what's well to do. The biggest challenge, as you know, comes when we're dealing with the other populations, such as family units, and that seem to exploit that. And as we go to applying consequences further up, and we intend to, and we have been somewhat, and hopefully we'll be able to increase our consequences of the criminal prosecution aspect as the courts start opening up and we're able to prosecute more cases there. The next concern would be, of course, is that single adults will start becoming family units again, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, they'll sell children to make a family unit. When I was chairman, we had testimony in $84 a child was sold to form a family unit. So there are no consequences being applied here. Well, there was with return to Mexico, but that was dismantled first day of this administration. So again, we have to actually understand what the root cause is. Sure, there are push factors, but the main root cause is the pull factor, the reality that you can come to America, say you're afraid to go home, and you're home free, you get to stay. That's the pull factor. That's why you have this problem. Until this administration is willing to recognize that root cause, we're going to continue to have an enormous problem, even though the Secretary won't admit it's a problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Senator Hassan, you're recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman Peter. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Portman for this hearing. I want to thank all of the members of this very distinguished panel before the committee today to discuss ongoing efforts to secure the southern border. Chief Huffman, I'm going to start with a question to you. I recently visited the southern border for a third time and was there in early April. I am concerned after that visit that DHS is not more widely deploying the technologies that you are using to help secure the border in some locations. Greater deployment of integrated and autonomous cameras, radar, sensors, and additional technology to detect and deter the unauthorized aerial vehicles, or UAVs, that smugglers use would expand CBP's capabilities, address existing security gaps, and be a force multiplier. Congress has previously appropriated millions of dollars for these technologies, some of which CBP has not spent. Chief Huffman, what is holding up CBP's deployment of smart border technologies, particularly to strategic locations? Does the department need additional funding for any equipment or to surge resources in order to complete required reviews or plans before the technology can be deployed?
So thank you for that question, and thank you for the funding. That's extremely important. The technology provides the CBP as a whole, and Border Patrol in particular, the level of situational awareness that's critical to their success, and for your recognition of that is important to do that. So the main reason between the lag between the obligation and the funds of the deployment is generally real estate issues and environmental issues. It's not a lack of resource issue. It's the process where you have to acquire. If you're acquiring property, right, or you're acquiring those things, working through those other, it's regulatory issues that we work through. We're working through those as quickly as we can, and intend to be deploying all the technology that we've assessed as quickly as we can. So
would it be helpful to you? I mean, when you work through regulatory issues like that, it takes personnel to do that. Would it be helpful to you to surge personnel who do these regulatory processes?
We have, well, it could very well be on the particular case. It all depends on where it is and what you're trying to accomplish. To do that, our office that does that, it works real closely with the different programs to do that. Right. If they need personnel, they ask for additional personnel and try to meet the time that's necessary. But certainly, if we have an opportunity to speed it along with that, we'd certainly be happy to do that and look into how that could help.
Well, I would look forward to working on that with you, because we've got to get that done, because that strategic deployment of that technology is really critical.
Yes, ma'am. I couldn't agree more.
Okay. Let me ask you another question, Chief. In your testimony, you noted that CBP is shifting Border Patrol agents and CBP officers from other locations to assist at the southern border. When I visited the border last month, personnel there said that while these temporary duty assignments certainly help address increased migrant flows, They are taxing for the agents, officers, and their families, and they're not a long-term solution. I'm also concerned that the continual and likely increased shifting of personnel to the southern border will have a detrimental impact on travel, trade, and security along the northern border. How will CBP work to increase personnel at the southern border and continually and reliably meet these staffing needs?
Again, thank you for that for two reasons. One, that anyone that takes care and concern about our front force, our workforce, it's important to us. So I appreciate your care and concern about that. It's a very challenging time. There's no question about that. And families have been, people have detailed it to those areas, to the problem areas, and we try to minimize that as much as we can. Some of the things we're working on is, one, for the first time ever, we're establishing these contract processors to get agents back to the field, which may relieve the need to bring more down. We're increasing our use of the remote processing to allow people to stay, using technology to stay on the northern border and process those ways as well as another process to do that. As we increase the hiring of our Border Patrol processing coordinators, also those things are all efforts that we're finding to affect the personnel issue, to deal with those issues, to increase more people on the front line organically or with contractors or with resources in there to do that, so we will have less likely to do that. Those takes a while to evolve as we get to those places to where they're function like we would like to. We rely upon our leadership on our northern border ports and northern border sectors to balance their resources as well as they can to address those, to minimize that. Lean heavily on our Stone Garden partners in those areas as well to help us address all those things across the enterprise. And it's a big case of risk management is what it is, and that's what we're trying to do the best we can in those situations.
Well, I understand you're trying to do the best you can. I am also obviously concerned that as we stand up more resources at the southern border, we attend to the security and trade and travel at the northern border as well. And I, again, look forward to working with you to make sure that happens. Ms. Kearney, the first pillar of the DHS plan for southern border security focuses on surging additional resources to support border operations, including medical support resources. The plan indicates that DHS is expanding medical support and COVID-19 mitigation protocols and was preparing to be able to provide medical care for up to 18,000 people per day by the end of April. Ms. Kearney, did DHS make its deadline? And how can DHS ensure that frontline operations have the necessary medical resources and support if 18,000 people were apprehended tomorrow?
Senator, thank you for that question. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the medical support plan. So currently, CBP has over 800 contract medical personnel capable of providing 24/7 medical support. They're also authorizing travel and pay for the current personnel to, again, move around the southwest border based on requirements. There's also been work with the federal interagency to identify and secure federal medical teams from across a variety of departments. That is underway, and those requests for assistance are in process. There's also work to plus up the contract that exists currently, and that is also underway with the task orders against that, as well as, I mentioned, the interagency agreements. So there is medical personnel on site now. There will be federal interagency support between now and May 23rd, teed up and employed, and then the expansion of the existing contracts.
So does that mean that in your assessment with those resources in place, that if there were 18,000 people at the border tomorrow, you would be prepared to meet the medical needs? That's what the plan said, you would be ready by the end of April.
Well, Senator, I think what I would say is, being a prudent and practical person, that we will have resources in place and we will have an ability to expand based on requirements. I think, again, as the Secretary and others have mentioned, if CBP were to encounter up to 18,000 people per day, that will place enormous strain on the system. And so I think it is unclear, whether the medical services that are currently in place or they're in the process of being in place could flex to that level. That is that is almost 3 times the number of people that are currently encountered at the border on average.
And I think one of my concerns, and Mr. Chair, I wanted to do one follow-up on this. I know I'm running over time, but one of my concerns about this planning, the discussion we've been having about getting ready for the eventual lifting of Title 42 is that people keep telling me, but we have a plan, and it isn't clear that having the plan and actually having the resources on the ground to meet the goals of that plan are the same thing. And so I appreciate this dialogue, but what I'm going to continue to follow up with all of you on is what does that mean in operational terms for the frontline personnel who will, in all likelihood, be seeing a significant increase in attempted migrant crossings when Title 42 is lifted. Now, I want to follow up with one other issue, Ms. Kearney. The DHS plan also indicated that the department is planning to expand its COVID-19 vaccine program to 24 CBP sites by May 23rd so that all age-eligible non-citizens who had not already been vaccinated would receive their first dose before they traveled beyond a processing center. Ms. Kearney, is the department's 100% vaccination plan based upon current apprehension levels, or does it account for 18,000 possible daily apprehensions? Would the 24 sites noted in the plan be sufficient to accommodate all unvaccinated individuals, or would additional sites and resources be necessary?
Senator, thank you for that question. I believe you kind of had a two-part question. I would like to address the first part because I think it is a very important point that is worth discussing in this forum. I think we would all agree that safety, officer safety, and the safety of the non-citizens crossing the border is a priority. And so the plan lays out the resources that we will need to have in place by May 23rd and have the ability to flex up to based on increases in encounters at the 12,000 and 18,000 encounter a day planning assumptions. So the plan lays out what we need to do. And what the Southwest Border Coordination Center, the people working in it, the interagency, is doing is actioning those planning items to actually resource the things that we need, whether it's additional federal law enforcement personnel, contract civilian processors to free up Border Patrol agents, contract security guards, buses, airlift, medical personnel, additional facilities.
Right.
That is what we have been doing and what we will continue to do in order to be ready for May 23rd and be positioned for additional encounters.
I am going to, the chairman is indicating that it is time to move on because we are well over time. That isn't the question I asked. I understand what you're saying to me now. I will look forward to following up with you. I would like, in writing, a response on the vaccination capacity. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Senator Padilla, you're recognized for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, first of all, I know there's been a lot of talk for several weeks now about Title 42. Title 42 and what it means if and when it is lifted on May 23rd or another date, to remind us on the committee and to remind the public that what Title 42 is and what it isn't. Title 42 is not an immigration law. It's a public health regulation. The other thing that's important to remind folks is we're engaging in important conversations about immigration policy and the asylum process is that it is absolutely legal for people who come from around the world to the United States to request asylum. Doesn't mean it's automatically guaranteed, but it is lawful to request asylum based on conditions that one or a family is fleeing. So I personally was happy to see the administration announce an end to Title 42 and the resumption of asylum processing at the border. Now, I know some of my colleagues would like the American public to think that taking down Title 42 is a major shift in policy. But lifting a public health order, which is what Title 42 is, actually would only return us to our existing immigration laws, where people seeking asylum in the country are allowed to exercise that legal right. Now, this legal right has been on the books for decades. My first question is for Ms. Mandrella. What obligations exist under U.S. and international law to allow people to exercise their right, their legal right to ask for asylum, and what impact did Title 42 have on that right?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. With respect to U.S. immigration law, I'll defer to my colleagues on the panel. with respect to international law, there are laws rather, in countries throughout the region. Each country's protection, the legal framework for protection and asylum is unique. One of the priorities of the State Department is to work with partner countries, select countries, to strengthen their protection mechanisms and to strengthen their asylum systems so that individuals seeking refuge in those countries can find meaningfully access in an efficient way protection in the countries where they seek it, and not be forced to take the journey to the United States in order to do so.
And second part of the question was, how did Title 42 help or hurt that process?
Sir, it's unique on every country context. I think just as the United States put in place a public health order at our border, many countries throughout the region enacted similar public health measures as well to require additional public health documentation upon entering a country, or to enact movement restrictions that we saw globally. The number of people on the move, migrating, be it irregularly or regularly, during the pandemic dropped dramatically because of generalized movement restrictions and quarantine, be those imposed by the state or self-imposed.
Look, I think from a layman's point of view, certainly didn't make things better. And I know we're living in unique times given a once-in-a-century global health pandemic. But it would be hard-pressed to suggest that the absence of the ability for somebody to seek asylum, a lawful opportunity, when you limit or constrain lawful opportunities to migrate, that only serves to add pressures and demands for unlawful methods of migration. So I don't think it's been a success by that measure. Let me change topics here for a second. I want to focus on DHS's plans for the wind down of Title 42. Again, I was glad to see that one of the 6 pillars of the plan for the end of Title 42 is focused on coordination and communication with NGOs at the border, as well as with state and local governments. I think this coordination is going to be key to ensuring that groups have time to prepare and local communities do not become overburdened as they receive and support individuals who have been screened, and only those properly released to continue with their immigration cases. I'm proud of the work that the state of California has done with groups in my state, including the California Welcoming Task Force, who have been working to support people who are coming to our country to seek safety. But they cannot effectively continue to do that without adequate communication and coordination from DHS, let alone financial assistance, but that's another conversation. I want to urge that the people working tirelessly at the department to prepare to return to a safer, more orderly, and more humane process at the border, particularly the SBCC, closely coordinate and communicate with NGOs and state and local governments, and not just in California, but across the border. Question for Mr. Nunez Neto. Can you walk us through the steps that you're taking as part of this plan to bolster the capacities and the preparedness of NGOs to receive non-citizens after they've been processed by CBP?
Yeah, thank you for that question, sir. And I'm happy to start the answer, but we'll hand it off to the senior coordinating official, Marianne Kearney, because the SBC is really where the rubber meets the road. So we have been working through FEMA's Emergency Food and Shelter Grant Program to provide resources to NGOs to help really, with the all the back end things that they do to, move migrants and non-citizens along to their final destinations. We are deeply thankful of, Congress enacting additional funds for that program this year. I will say, as Marianne often notes, that there continues to be a gap between what the U.S. government can do and what the need is. And I'll maybe hand the baton over to her to describe how the SBCC is trying to fill that gap.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Senator, for that question. I will agree with you that I think California has a very robust system for addressing the migrant surge in that state, in particular the California Office of Emergency Services, the City and County of San Diego, as well as the two primary NGOs servicing those areas. A lot of work has been done by the CBP lead field coordinator, again, the senior official on the ground responsible for coordinating all of this, to establish regularized and robust interaction with the state and with locals. For example, at the CBP Emergency Operations Center for Region 9, which covers California, Cal OES and Cal Health have representatives in that location. I believe that that is kind of the gold standard and the ideal that I would personally like to see across the southwest border in terms of complete physical integration of those operations. In addition, a lot of work has been done with the NGOs. I'll use California as an example because one of the first things I did when I got this assignment was go visit the border, and in each of my locations, I did meet with NGOs and tour their operations and discuss with them their challenges. And that ongoing interaction and operational coordination was a key thing that I heard as well as something that was not as robust as it needed to be. And that's something at the SBCC with the lead field coordinators we have worked I would say relentlessly to improve through regularized and recurring meetings, both with NGOs and with state and local officials that have an operational role. That's occurred in California, as I mentioned, which I believe is the gold standard. That is occurring.
Thank you, Mr. I hate to interrupt, but I don't want to be the only member that didn't go over his time. I want to ask one more quick question, but before I do, underscore what you just said. If California is the model through that interagency coordination and collaboration, then I invite all my colleagues on this committee and across the Senate to support replicating that model throughout the southwest border, not just on the California side. But my final item, just quickly, now DHS has indicated also that in preparation for a potential increase in migration, the agency will focus on targeting people who attempt to cross the border more than once for criminal prosecution as part of the agency's initiative to escalate consequences and conserve processing resources. The agency has also indicated that it will refer for prosecution, quote, those whose conduct warrants it. And while that may sound good at the surface level, I'm concerned about the plan to use prosecution as a deterrent without being, clear-eyed and focused on how it's applied. In the past, such deterrent policies haven't always worked, and instead were just used to punish asylum seekers, which we've already established is lawful. So it's a potential huge violation of U.S. obligations under the Refugee Convention. Question for Mr. Huffman. Does CBP have plans to refer asylum seekers for prosecution, and if not, how you're going to safeguard that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. As you know, that the United States government secures its border by proper application of administrative and criminal law. That's the method we use for securing our borders, and that's what we do. The plan to increase prosecution for those that warrant it, and generally will be primarily someone who's been referred for expedited removal. They've been removed and they've returned. They've already gone through that process already to do that. I can tell you that no one will be referred to prosecution simply because they're an asylum seeker. That would be well outside our guidelines. In addition to that, we refer cases for criminal prosecution if we feel they should be prosecuted. The U.S. Attorney has ultimate determination if they would go forward with that case. But as foes that as we say, circumstances warranted would be people that may try to harm a Border Patrol agent, may put somebody else in danger, those kind of circumstances that increase the likelihood of it's a dangerous person. Could be their criminal record. They may have some sort of record also that warrants it, that may lead it to be more likely a candidate for criminal prosecution. There's a number of factors along those ways that can do that well.
So, thank you for a response. In closing, I just want to underscore we'll be following up to ensure proper communication of that understanding, change in policies, training of folks on the ground and closer to the ground to make sure that what you're suggesting here is followed through in practice. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Ossoff, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. Ms. Tierney. The United States must know and control who enters and exits our territory. That's a basic condition of sovereignty. The Department expects, does it not, a significant increase in attempted unauthorized entry along the southern border this summer?
Sir, the DHS Office of Immigration Statistics has published projections that show an increase in irregular migration post-Title 42.
Is the administration prepared for this anticipated surge in attempted crossing?
Senator, thank you for that question. We have identified the needed requirements to meet the different levels of our planning assumptions, and we are actively working to both resource physical assets as well as policies and improvements to processing to meet those increased surges.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. But my question is a simpler one. Is the administration prepared?
Well, sir, I think since some of these projections are higher than what CBP has seen previously, I think we are doing prudent planning. We are using the planning to identify the resource requirements that would be needed based on what experts like Chief Huffman and others identify as the need. We're working to improve policies. So I think we are readying ourselves, and we are going to be as ready as we can be come May 23rd.
Well, if you're not able to confidently state that the administration is prepared, what are the requirements that are unmet? Have you sent, for example, a request for a supplemental to Congress? If you're not prepared, what's it going to take to get prepared? Because my constituents lack confidence that sufficient preparation is ongoing and that the administration is prepared. So if you're not prepared, what do you need?
Well, sir, I would not say that we are not prepared. What I would say is that we are preparing based on projections, based on requirements identified by experts. We are resourcing against those requirements, and we will have the necessary items in place for May 23rd. Now, again, I have been doing that. I've been an emergency manager for quite some time. I never feel like we're prepared enough. I always want to be more prepared than we need to be. And so we are doing everything we can to be ready. We have been working furiously, really, since the fall of 2021 to get ready. We are more ready now than we were yesterday, and we will certainly be more ready on May 23rd than we are now.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. How will you measure success?
So we have identified we have identified for each of our major agencies items that would indicate stability. So, like, for example, with Customs and Border Protection, the Southwest Border Coordination Center has identified a stability goal for Border Patrol that is having twice as much holding as we have encounters over a 48-hour period. So, for example, if CBP if the Border Patrol is seeing about 6,000 to 7,000 encounters a day, which is what they're generally seeing right about now, then you would want to have about 13,000 to 14,000 holding spaces available. And I think that's an indicator of what the system can absorb and process through in about a 48-hour period.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. My time is limited, but I'd like you to walk me through several of the other metrics or qualitative assessments that you'll use to measure success. You say you're preparing, so and I acknowledge that work is ongoing. How will you measure whether that preparation has been effective? You mentioned holding capacity relative to encounters. What are the other measures of success?
So time in custody would be another measure of success. Also, the ability to decompress Border Patrol stations through lateral movement and some of the other options that we have identified, like mobile in-route processing. Again, so, monitoring the capacity of the individual sectors, identifying sectors that are overcapacity, and then being able to flex to address that overcapacity.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. Ms. Contreras, I want to discuss with you the welfare of unaccompanied minors in federal custody. First of all, has ORR mistreated or previously subjected minors in U.S. immigration detention to abusive conditions, to risk of abuse, to sexual misconduct? Has that occurred in U.S. custody?
Senator, thank you for that question. As background, I want you to know that during my first week on the job, I visited Fort Bliss. I wanted to see what the care was like for the children, as you are speaking to, and I thank you for asking about it. What we saw is ORR, we have the responsibility at HHS for our legal and moral obligation, and that's always first about the safety of kids. We have had situations when we had to move very quickly to meet a greater capacity in a short amount of time where we needed to improve conditions. And that has been the focus over the last year. So that now what you see are a lot of emergency intake sites were, of course, now demobilized. But you see the care that's needed, mental health supports for kids, case management so they have access to someone, recreation, health, safety needs, those have all been the priority.
Ms. Contreras, and I do want to get into the steps that are being taken now, and I recognize that this GAO report refers to misconducts and incidents principally or even entirely prior to your tenure. I recognize that. But this is a HHS OIG report. It talks about inadequate supervision, sexual misconduct, the abuse of children in U.S. federal custody. It is completely unacceptable that this has taken place. And so I want to ask you two questions, Ms. Contreras, with my time remaining, and these will be my final questions. I thank you in advance for your responses. The first is, can you give this committee and the Congress and the American people and my constituents assurances that preparations have been made, safeguards are in place to ensure that minor children in U.S. immigration detention are never subjected to this abuse again? That's the first question. The second question is, what specific steps are you taking to ensure that, and will you grant the Red Cross unrestricted access to ORR facilities that house migrant children? I'll give you the time with the chairman's indulgence to answer. That'll be my final question. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the question of access to the Red Cross, that's something that I would have to ask our team about, but I'd be happy to do that and get back to you. We welcome the oversight that comes from members of this committee, from our nonprofit partners, from the Flores Monitor. That's an important part of accountability and transparency as we carry out this very important mission.
I'm sorry, I know I said I was done, and the chairman's gonna tap me out with the gavel soon, but I mean, I do have here, this is a Red Cross press release saying HHS and ORR and FEMA have requested that the Red Cross provide support to ensure unaccompanied children have safe, clean, comfortable conditions in detention. So you are seeking this from the Red Cross, is that correct? Will you grant them access to facilities even when you don't ask for it so they can inspect these facilities and ensure that children aren't being mistreated?
Senator, that is something that I will follow up with. I haven't seen the letter, but again, we welcome oversight and we certainly value our partners. I don't want to end without addressing your first question about what is the commitment. You absolutely have the commitment of the ORR staff, of HHS, and certainly myself. 1 month into my tenure as Assistant Secretary, I have represented many kids as their lawyer who have been abused in many ways. And while we always have that possibility of predators being in existence, what we are doing at HHS, we're the Child Welfare Agency, is to make sure that we are taking every precaution, that we are staffed adequately so that there are eyes on our children, that we are using safeguards to make sure that we are keeping kids safe. So you have my absolute assurance that that is the #1 priority for us at HHS.
Thank you. Look forward to the follow-up on the Red Cross.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Mr. Nunes-Neto, if I could just start with you. You are the acting Assistant Secretary for Border and Immigration Policy at DHS. Is that right?
That is right, Senator.
So it's your role then to help formulate and drive policy and implement those policies at the department. Have I got that right?
Correct.
So help me understand the administration's policy. Are you trying to stop illegal immigration anymore, or have you given up on that?
Sir, we are committed to enforcing the laws that Congress has enacted at the border. And as I noted in my testimony, we are expanding our use of expedited removal as we prepare for at the end of Title 42, particularly for recidivist border crossers.
Okay, so that sounds like a yes. So that's a yes. You're still trying to stop illegal immigration? It's hard to tell, but you're telling me yes?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, so let's just talk about a few of your policies, since you're in charge of policy, and you can tell me which of these has been effective in stopping illegal immigration. Okay, ending construction of the border wall. Has that been effective in stopping illegal immigration?
Well, I would defer to my colleague from Customs and Border Protection, but my understanding is that barriers on the border serve to slow irregular migration, not stop irregular migration.
So, okay, so you're saying that the border wall is not effective. So maybe we should just tear the whole thing down.
The border wall is effective in rerouting migration, and it is effective in slowing the pace at which migrants can cross the border, which is particularly important in urban and suburban settings. In rural areas, what we have found is it is still fairly easy for migrants to make holes in the walls.
So interesting. So stopping construction of it, though, hasn't slowed illegal immigration. How about terminating the Remain in Mexico policy, which you've tried to do? Has that stopped illegal immigration or slowed it?
Sir, as you know, we are in the process of re-implementing the MPP program as part of the
Yeah, because you're under court order to do so, but you've tried as a matter of policy to end it. So was that successful in slowing illegal immigration?
Sir, as our secretary noted in his prior testimony, his view is that the MPP program poses unjustifiable costs on migrants and illegally restricts their access to the asylum system.
Yeah, okay. How about ending our Safe Third agreements with Northern Triangle countries? Has that been successful in stopping or slowing illegal immigration?
Well, I would defer to my colleague from the State Department in terms of these international agreements, but only one of those agreements was even starting to be implemented prior to Title 42. And
have we seen a decrease in illegal immigration since you eliminated them?
Well, I think what you've seen, sir, is the impact of Title 42 on our border crossings.
Oh, okay. Since you mentioned Title 42, has the attempt to rescind Title 42, has that been successful in slowing illegal immigration?
Title 42, I think, has had a really interesting effect on migration in that, because of the number of repeat border crossers we see, it has actually inflated our numbers at the border. I think, what you're also
saying that the Title II restrictions have increased illegal immigration? Are you saying that the Title 42 restrictions have increased illegal immigration? Is that your testimony?
I think that the data is clear that Senator Johnson showed earlier that once Title 42 restrictions were put in place, we've seen an actual increase in migration from Mexico in particular, and that's because of the lack of consequences.
So eliminating it will then, you think, decrease the amount of illegal immigration?
I think over time, once we start reimposing significant immigration consequences on people at the border through our use of expedited removal, particularly for single adults and particularly for those from Mexico, you're going to see it decrease over time.
That is news. That is news, ladies and gentlemen, that this administration's position, you still clearly want to rescind Title 42, and you think that rescinding it will decrease illegal immigration at the border. So let's just talk about the facts here. Last year alone, DHS experienced a record 1.7 million border crossings. More than 2 million unauthorized migrants crossed the southern border during the last calendar year. In FY22 to date, there have been 245,390 illegal crossings in just the Rio Grande Valley and 195,289 in Del Rio. The number of single adults crossing in these areas is up 75%. Why is it up? Because of all of the policies that we've just talked about. Your policies are single-handedly leading to an explosion of illegal immigration at the border, and yet you're sitting here and telling me that border walls have nothing to do with it, that Title 42 will lead to a decrease in illegal immigration, that eliminating the Safe Third agreements have nothing to do with the surge. Good heavens. This is just remarkable. All right, let me ask you something else. Last week, DHS released a memorandum that lays out your 6-part plan to address the current by the way, what would you call what's happening at the border? Is it a crisis?
I believe we're facing significant challenges at the border, sir.
Challenges. Is it a problem?
I think there are parts of the border where we have seen particularly problematic flows.
Problematic flows, parts of the border, but it's not a crisis.
It is a challenge, sir.
Okay. Let the record reflect that the witness does not think that this is a crisis. I'd hate to see what a crisis would be. I mean, who could possibly imagine? All right. I assume you played a role in drafting this plan. Let's look at some of the prongs of this plan. You want to bolster the capacity of non-governmental organizations to receive non-citizens after they've been processed by CBP and are awaiting the results of their immigration removal proceedings. You want to increase CBP processing efficiency in order to address overcrowding at Border Patrol stations. I have to be honest with you, as I look at this, it looks like an attempt to memorialize your efforts to help as many illegal immigrants get into the country as possible.
Sir, the third pillar of the plan is our efforts to impose consequences on those who try to enter the country.
Of which you have a demonstrated track record of doing precisely nothing of any consequence. You have presided over the most unbelievable explosion of illegality at the border in American history. And now what you're proposing looks like ways to turn this mass immigration into mass amnesty.
Sir, with all due respect, I think that Title 42 is not an immigration measure. It is a public health authority.
Well, you just told us a minute ago that withdrawing it would decrease illegal immigration. Look, with all due respect, nothing you have said here is remotely credible. If you think that withdrawing Title 42 will decrease illegal immigration, I mean, I invite you to have that discussion with the members of this committee, maybe particularly on the Democrat side. I think they'd be fascinated to hear that. I mean, believe me, I'll help them. I'm happy to talk about your testimony today. I'll be telling everybody about it. But you have single-handedly foisted on this country a mass crisis that is endangering children, that is leading to an avalanche of drugs in my state, that is increasing criminality. And for you to sit here and tell me that eliminating Title 42 is a solution and that nothing you have done has had any consequence and that border walls aren't effective and that third safe agreements aren't effective and remain in Mexico isn't effective, frankly, sir, you have no credibility whatsoever, and neither does the administration that you work for. What you do have, though, is responsibility for everything that's happening at the border. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Witnesses, you've been here a long time. We appreciate your testimony, but we're going to start a second round for individuals who have a few more questions. The second round, we're going to attempt to limit to 5 minutes. We'll try to be more effective than limiting initial round at 7 minutes, but we will have a few more questions here. First, Ms. Contreras, my question is for you. CBP facilities are clearly not an acceptable location to house unaccompanied minors, and you mentioned that in your testimony. But how is HHS cooperating across departments to ensure sufficient resources are in place to prevent vulnerable children from spending extended amounts of time in these CBP facilities?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I think we would all agree, that all of my colleagues on this panel, that HHS is the child welfare agency. It is our job to, when children are referred to us, be able to take them as quickly as we can into our care. What we see now is that the average length of stay in CBP is less than 24 hours, and that's an accomplishment everyone has worked very hard on. We have had a lot of coordination between our teams of ORR, CBP, and throughout DHS in order to make sure that we're coordinating and that we are taking care of children as soon as we can. What you see is there's been some co-location of staff that is a big part of being able to make that happen. So this remains a priority. We're glad that that number is down to less than a day in the custody of CBP, and that's something that will remain a priority in our work.
All right, thank you. Fentanyl and other illicit narcotics are harming our communities, and we certainly need to do everything we can to stop them from entering in the country. In February of this year, I led my colleagues in requesting additional funding for non-intrusive inspection systems that will improve CBP officers' ability to interdict these illegal drugs. Chief Hoffman, could you please discuss for the committee the impact of non-intrusive inspection systems on CBP's rate of narcotics interdictions?
Thank you for that question, Senator, and be happy to discuss that a little bit. As you know, as you mentioned, fentanyl is a huge threat to our nation right now, and we're seeing a lot of it, and the amount we're seeing seems to increase every year. Most of the fentanyl now is coming across the southern border being encountered at the ports of entry, primarily at in San Diego and Otay Mesa, two main areas we're seeing most of the fentanyl coming across. And then one of the main tools we use to use that, to encounter that, is the NI equipment that we're grateful to have. It helps us to be very successful in identifying that stuff, because fentanyl is a unique narcotic as opposed to big bundles of marijuana or whatever. It can be easily stored. What we've seen recently, though, is we've seen an increasing number of packages caught, but in smaller quantities, indicating they're adjusting their tactics as well. You know, maybe trying to beat our NI capabilities. The smaller the packets, but more cross increases their chances to get across. But currently, CBP is utilizing over 350 large-scale and over 4,500 small-scale non-intrusive inspection systems across the southwest border to inspect cargo, containers, commercial trucks, rail cars, privately owned vehicles. And we use them not just at the ports of entry, but some of our interior checkpoints as well. By FY23, CBP expects to increase NI scans to these vehicles by up to 40% more with the equipment we have coming. And so as we're able to increase the scans, we obviously expect increased encounters of narcotics, but also the more we increase, the better we're able to deter future acts on that thing. So it is a very important tool. We're very appreciative we have that, and we will continue to use that greatly across all of our borders.
So given it's an effective tool and you'd like to spread it, how many additional non-intrusive inspection systems do you think are needed to fully equip all of our nation's ports of entry?
So I'm not sure the right number have that with me, Senator, but I'd be glad to get that back to you if I consult more with my OFO colleagues to give you the exact number.
Well, we'd like that, so I'd appreciate that. Another question for you, sir, is what efforts is CBP undertaking to ensure that the information gathered related to drug smuggling is shared among our partner agencies in order to better combat the transnational criminal organizations that are operating these operations?
Thank you, sir. I think I appreciate that question as well. Our ability to share information with our partners in this is key in order to be successful. So we participate extensively in different task force and that we partner with our different agencies at the federal level, state level, and local level, depending on what we're doing. We work closely with ICE and HSI on cases collaboratively. The information we gather at our encounters is shared with them almost all the time. I mean, we never cease to do that. Same with DEA. We facilitate information across the whole range, whether it's on our southern border, northern border, and interior. We participate in a number of joint operations with our state and locals and also our Stone Garden partners, and we share that information across in different meetings and things that we have in order to ensure we do that. I think our ability to work together with all our partners and all agencies makes us a better place, a better organization, and much more effective, and we continue to do that on a regular basis. I've been doing this for many years, and we participate at all levels at all times, and it's just invaluable to be able to share that information with those partners.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for their patience with us today. There's just so much to go over. Let me just talk quickly about what I think we've learned today. One is a deep concern expressed by just about every member of this panel, Democrat and Republican, about the lack of a plan in place to properly address the surge of migrants who will certainly be coming over the border when Title 42 ends. That's, I think, a consensus point. Second, an acknowledgement that the asylum process is totally broken and that it acts as a magnet to draw people to the border and over the border. Here are the numbers. Secretary Mayorkas tells us the average asylum case processing time is 6 to 8 years. We heard today it's 5 to 6 years, but that's not what your boss says. But let's say it's 5 to 6 years. It's a long time when people are in the community, living in the community, working, and kids going to school, having children, becoming part of the community. There's a 1.6 million person backlog now on asylum claims being considered by the courts. 1.2 million people have gone through the process and received a final order of removal, meaning they should be deported because they were not successful in their asylum claim. And yet the administration has reduced the number of people being deported. It's now 56,000 a year. That's about 4%. In the Obama-Biden years, it was 350,000 a year. Incidentally, under law, Section 235 of the Immigration Nationality Act, there is a requirement for detention of unlawful migrants seeking asylum crossing our border without authorization. And yet, of course, we don't have the capacity to do that. This administration has reduced the number of ICE beds. We're now at 24,000 beds, much of which are already full. So that's where we are, and that's why it's true, I think, that there's a consensus here on this panel that this is broken, we have to fix it. On the illegal narcotics coming over, Agent, I appreciate the work your folks do. I was at Mariposa, the port of entry near Nogales earlier this year, saw the desperate need for more of these scanning devices you talked about to try to stop the fentanyl. The fentanyl is streaming into our communities. It's coming in at such high volumes now that it's reducing the price because of supply and demand. Huge supply, very inexpensive, and it is causing more deaths as a result. I'm a big fan of looking at the demand side. I've passed legislation, and it's working now on treatment and recovery and prevention, but it's impossible to deal with this flood and not have many more people dying of overdoses. We're at record levels right now. Here's the numbers that we have. Only 2% of passenger vehicles are being scanned. Only 17% of commercial vehicles are being scanned. That's it. And yet that's where 90% of the seizures attributed to non-intrusive inspections are resulting from. So this is where we're finding most of these narcotics. It's a huge increase. In March, a huge increase from the last previous March, 300% increase from the previous March. It's at levels we've never seen before. And yet, think of all those trucks and cars that we're not scanning. So the question, Agent Huffman, is how can we do better? There's a plan to increase that by the end of next year. And yet I look at the President's budget this year, there's zero in the budget for new scanning machines. So I guess my question for you is, are we on track at least to reach this number of 40% of passenger vehicles instead of 2% and 70% of commercial vehicles instead of 17% by the end of next year?
Yes, sir, we are on track. We are on track by the end of FY23 to be to increase the scans to scan 40% of vehicles and the 72% of the commercial vehicles respectively. And as you know, we certainly like to do more, and as we increase our ability to do so, we will do that. It's key that we're able to look at, obviously we'd like to look at every single thing that comes into the country if we have the ability to do that, because it's important to do that, and there's no question that fentanyl is a significant threat to us.
We provided the funding for you back in 2019 to get to that number of 40% at least of cars, 70% of trucks, and we should provide more, but again, in the budget, there's nothing. On unaccompanied kids, Senator also talked about this. Kids have been mistreated in the past, as we know. There's lots of stories about it, unfortunately. I got involved in this because of a bunch of kids from Guatemala. 6 of them were brought up by their trafficker, went into HHS custody. Then HHS gave them to sponsors. Those sponsors were the traffickers, the very traffickers who had treated them so poorly coming up from the border, lied to their parents, and they took them to an egg farm in Ohio where 6 kids as young as 14 lived in deplorable situations, underpaid, working 6-7 days a week, not in school, and luckily a local authority found it, and this is one thing that got the interest of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations of this committee. Senator Carper and I did an intensive investigation. We published 3 reports about it, and basically about the failure of the federal agencies to be responsible for the care of our unaccompanied kids. So, Ms. Contreras, I don't have time to get into this in the detail I'd like to, but as you know, we've done a lot of work in this area. We think it is totally unacceptable for the U.S. government to release unaccompanied kids, who are by definition much more vulnerable to trafficking, to unrelated sponsors and not to do more follow-up. Right now, we are told that there is no follow-up after 3 phone calls and that we don't know where 19,000 unaccompanied kids are. We cannot determine their safety and well-being. Is that correct?
Senator, thank you for that question, and thank you for your leadership on making sure that we keep our duty to children, and that includes post-release. What I would like to share is that the work that has been done to strengthen the post-release work, some of which you referred to, which are well-being follow-up calls, There are home visits in place now if there are concerns raised. The background checks and vetting that happens for sponsors is designed specifically to avoid the kinds of problems that have happened. We take the safety of kids very seriously. It's the number one priority, and we keep building on what our duties are. How do we carry out those duties to build up that post-release support as well to make sure that they are in safe hands?
Well, there's a continuing issue, as you know, as to who has responsibility, and my hope is that HHS, under your leadership, takes additional responsibility for these kids. Someone's got to be responsible for their care. Let me ask you a very specific question as my final question, Mr. Chairman. HHS has cooperated with some of our requests for information. We continue to do oversight on this issue, as you know, but we have yet to receive documents that we have requested, and these were requested in January in a letter to HHS Secretary Javier Becerra. Can you commit to ensuring that HHS sends the remaining documents by the end of next week?
Senator, you do have my commitment that we'll go back and get the attention of who I need to figure out what it is that we owe you and how we can make sure that we follow up as promptly as we can.
I'll tell you what it is. It's very simple. It's the number of sponsors out there, the number of sponsors who have been denied, information that you would have, and it's not information that is difficult, I wouldn't think, to find, and very necessary for us to do the proper oversight. So I really appreciate your getting those to us by next week so that we can continue our oversight work. And again, to each of you, thank you for your service, and particularly to those of you representing people on the border itself, you have an impossible task. Thank you for what you do every day. The American people are asking a lot of you, and I know it's very stressful, and I know there's been a difficulty in retention and recruitment, and we need to do everything we can to hold Agent, your people up right now, because it's hard already, and it's about to get a whole lot harder. And we owe them not just better policy in the administration, but better legislating, and we will continue to work on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Parman. Senator Sinema, recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to echo what Senator Portman just said about the respect for the men and women who serve in blue and green on the front lines of our border. I think that we can safely say it's a bipartisan agreement that we admire and strongly support their efforts. So want to pass along my thanks as well, particularly to those who are serving throughout southern Arizona. Chief Huffman, robust migrant processing at ports of entry is a key part of the DHS plan for the southern border. However, Arizona's ports of entry were not designed to manage large-scale asylum processing. So this has the potential to create a volatile situation that is unsafe for our CBP officers and our migrants when bottlenecks occur and frustration rises. While the funding I secured for ports of entry modernization with my colleague, Senator Portman, in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will be very helpful in the long term, these modernization projects are still years from completion. What capacity requirements for infrastructure, transportation, and related staffing will be in place for Arizona ports to prevent overcrowding and disruptions to trade and travel? How many individuals will CBP have capacity to process in Arizona on a daily basis? And on what date will all those deployments be complete?
Thank you for your question, and again, thank you for your support for the men and women on the front line of CBP. They certainly, as you mentioned, they're facing some enormous challenge, and it's going to get tougher. As far as Arizona and specifically, I don't have specific numbers to Arizona specific with me, but I can get those numbers to you to exactly what's in place, unless you have them.
Do not, Chief.
Okay, get those to you what they are, but I do know that they're going to There are concerns about the volumes. It's going to be all of our ports of entry. Arizona, in particular, as you asked for, safety and security of our folks are top in front of our minds at all the times. So each port, they will take appropriate steps if they need to, including temporarily halting processing if they have to. They will they'll reorder the lines. They have our mobile field force teams trained up and ready to go in case it does get a volatile situation to help control crowds. And if necessary, if they have to, they may even close down lanes or close down the ports until they can regain order. Those are the standard steps we've taken historically in the past when we've had challenges at our ports of entry, and they're well versed in understanding how to do those and execute those along the way if we get to those cases. We are, as we mentioned, are detailing people to those areas. We are building up the capacity to process throughputs. Arizona, as you know, is kind of a unique challenge. They don't have the same NGO support for follow-on afterwards that you do in other areas, and so as Ms. Kearney mentioned earlier, we're addressing those as well to try to get to move those through those things. I know you mentioned earlier about the other states, and wasn't although you were concerned about it, that wasn't top on your list, but those are key, as she mentioned, about having the system to allow us to decompress laterally and move those people. And when those people are processed through, they would be released in some area besides in the Arizona area and the Yuma area. So all those things have been taken in consideration as we try to work specifically on these difficult areas. The Yuma sector of the Border Patrol is one of the most challenging ones to deal with. It is the one that's always the first one to be over capacity because it's the infrastructure is such small there when we start getting traffic flows in there. So that's a number one focus that we're working on, trying to continue to find ways to decompress that, move people out of there, and minimize the impact as much as possible on the local community.
Mr. Nunez-Neto, I'm pleased to hear that DHS has based part of their plan on the regional processing centers model that I proposed with Senator Cornyn in our Bipartisan Border Solutions Act. I know Senator Portman spoke about that earlier. These enhanced centralized processing centers will co-locate DHS components, nonprofits, and other relevant entities to help reduce systemic inefficiencies. I understand the pilot location became operational on April 29th in Laredo, Texas, and that this pilot will be used to work out the logistics for future centers. What factors are being used to determine future locations for these processing centers, and how long do you anticipate it will take to operationalize additional centers?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Senator. This is something I think we are all very excited about, bringing innovation to the process at the border. I think these enhanced central processing centers have a lot of potential, to allow us to better triage the flow and focus, consequences on higher risk individuals, but then for lower risk individuals who are going to be referred into immigration proceedings and released, have facilities that allow us to co-locate with ICE, with potentially HHS, and with NGOs in order to have kind of a much more seamless handoff at every stage of the process within the same facility. I think what we're looking to see really is whether we realize those gains in terms of the handoffs between each step of the process and the time in custody that they're spending, actually being, held in CBP custody. We're also hoping that this process will allow us to, by minimizing the law enforcement footprint in the facility, have more of our law enforcement officers on the line doing their primary law enforcement function rather than doing processing. And a big part of that effort is going to be looking at ways to contract out the processing support. I believe that there is an expansion plan in place. I don't know, Chief Huffman, if you know the next locations. If not, we will get back to you on those.
I don't have the exact next locations now, but I think the things about when you stand these up, you have the ability, as you see how traffic flows, you want to try to anticipate where you're going to need them the most. We can make some estimates of where we need them the most, but I think as we see the traffic flows, we'll be able to be as nimble as we can to be there to the right spot.
Thank you. We intend to follow up on that. Would like to hear follow-up information, and in particular, whether or not Arizona can expect to get an enhanced centralized processing center. We'll want to hear more about that, and of course, when we can expect it to be fully operational. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each of our witnesses. Thank you for joining us today. And I think I speak for all members of the committee. We want to thank you for your commitment to addressing both the humanitarian and security challenges that we face on our southern border. I certainly appreciate the very thorough discussion that we had today about the administration's efforts to secure our southern border, preparations in advance of the termination of Title 42 public health order, and certainly the expected challenges that we're likely to face in managing migration changes that will occur when this order is repealed. These challenges are certainly not unique to this administration. We've seen surges in the number of migrants for the past decade, under both Republican as well as Democratic administrations. And I think from hearing testimony here today, it's clear that until Congress and the administration enact some common sense bipartisan solutions to fix our immigration systems, these circumstances are going to continue to prevail. There are certainly many issues where we disagree. We heard some of those here today. But I think there's some areas of agreement as well that we should rally around. Increasing consequences for illegal entry, addressing the root causes of migration, increasing regional cooperation on these issues, and the need for bipartisan reform passed by Congress. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the administration on some of these common sense efforts. We will be working diligently and hopefully can accomplish what we need to accomplish. The hearing record will remain open for 15 days until May 20th at 5 p.m. for the submissions of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.